hey, hey, ho, ho, welcome to the show. Hey, 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 ho, ho, welcome. Alright.
1, 2, 3, 4.
The history of Game Grumps is a tale best told with reverence, and in hushed whispers as to not cause unnecessarily hurt feelings. It's a history of success and failure, of betrayal and friendship, of censored slurs and gay visual novels, but in the beginning, it was simply the tale of a strange, potentially lizard-slaughtering man by the name of Arin Hanson. Arin was a guy who always had a lot of random interests, and though he had a good amount of work ethic, he struggled with being emotionally insecure and angry, causing him to drop particular interests and move on to other things when they had run their course in his mind. In school, he did well when teachers were understanding and the subjects being taught were interesting to him, but struggled with feelings of resentment and, as the illustrious Spooky Weeb Trash puts it, spitefulness, which caused feelings of self-doubt as to why he pursued or excelled in the certain interests that he did. The struggle between believing he was doing something because he was genuinely passionate about it, and doing something just because he wanted to spite those who didn't want him to do something, or didn't think he could do something, was a common theme throughout his life. Perhaps it was just this spite that caused him to create his infamous Egoraptor account on Newgrounds, September 16, 2001, the Sunday after 9/11. While the rest of us plebeians were watching commercials for Candle Vigil sponsored by NBC, Arin was watching such classics as All Your Base Are Belong to Us, and a single flash animation frame of the letter B. This is also where he started his voice acting career, helping various creators by voicing in their original works. It wasn't until 3 years and 3 days later that Arin would upload his own original work, not on Newgrounds however, but on DeviantArt, a 111 frame flash animation making fun of Final Fantasy VII, aptly named Final Fantasy VII Flash Spoof. It basically consisted of Arin kind of saying a bunch of random surface level observations of Final Fantasy VII in a goofy voice. His post on DeviantArt is still up, and he kind of comes across as a shy fella presenting his work to the class, self-deprecating in the description, saying that while it's pretty funny, it's really poorly made. He also mentions his swearing and his use of the N-word in the animation in a way that makes him seem a bit embarrassed of it, which was honestly pretty weird for the 2004 internet days. I'd also like to point out that while 90% of the comments were really nice and talked about how amazing his voice was, he made sure to respond to each and every seemingly critical comment he got, with either a written out defense or a snarky reply. He also made sure to respond to any comment mentioning Final Fantasy VII in a positive light, or any question asking if he liked Final Fantasy VII, being sure to make it clear that he does not like Final Fantasy VII in any way, and he hates Square Enix with a burning passion. This, in my opinion, shows that even back in 2004, Arin had a problem with a bit of that self-doubt and potential anger we discussed earlier, and him being so readily available and providing harsh criticism of the pretty universally beloved, even at the time, Final Fantasy VII, is pungent foreshadowing for events to come. For now though, Arin was nigh but a voice actor slash animator that enjoyed making goofy animations, the first success of which came from his Awesome series, a series started on February 23, 2006, with the inaugural episode, Metal Gear Awesome. The format was pretty much the standard YouTube video game parody animation you'd find in 2011 or so, though Arin was definitely one of the forerunners of the format and, in my opinion, one of the best. I remember back when I was a young, sheltered teen on the internet, and I loved the whole video game parody stuff, but I was always scared of Oni's animations because they seemed a little bit too crazy. And of course there are plenty of other extremely edgy video game animators at the time, and it's not like Egoraptor was squeaky clean himself, but the Awesome series seemed to be one of the only ones that tried to actually tell jokes, and not just have the character blow up in an explosion of blood and guts while yelling racial slurs. My personal favorite was his Awesome, Just a Pokemon Battle video, and it seems I wasn't alone because this video quickly became his most popular in 2011 and, From the AdSense earnings alone off this video, Arin was able to allegedly purchase his first car on his own. Of course, Arin's awesome series was not the only brand of content you could expect from him throughout his solo animation career. There was also Girl Chan in Paradise, a parody of shonen anime, Lemon and Bill, some weird series where a bullet and a lemon get trapped in video game worlds, wacky game jokes for kids style, and his most controversial series, Sequelitis. Sequelitis was a really interesting beast for the time. While most video game videos would hinge almost entirely on comedy, only using the game they're discussing as a jumping off point for jokes and skits, Sequelitis was a very thorough analysis comparing and contrasting a sequel of a popular game to its previous entry in the series. Now, there are still comedic elements to the reviews, but it was a breath of fresh air for viewers who wanted a more analytical take on the format. I mean, I kid you not when I say if you go back to these now 13-year-old videos, you'll think they were made just last month with how timeless they are. However, the opinions expressed in these videos were a whole nother story. Arin often made wild and seemingly baseless assertions throughout these videos without much justification for the points he would make. This could probably be just a byproduct of the time, and this format being less common back in 2011, but I believe it goes back to Arin's propensity towards emotional justification. Looking throughout the series, you'll often see him make points based upon how things feel in games, or how a game is artificially difficult. Now, don't get me wrong, these are perfectly valid criticisms of the game, and I think the fact that he came at game design in a more feelings-based way was what made his points resonate with so many people. But the folks who didn't agree didn't have any way to see his point, since it was based on his subjective feelings towards the mechanic and not a lot of coherent reasoning. Now, you may believe this is why I described the series as controversial, but in actuality, the controversy around this series was due to how good of a series it was. Let me explain. So what happens when you make a highly produced series that's almost universally enjoyed, and it becomes a bedrock and testament to your channel's quality? Obviously, people want you to make a lot of them. Well, what happens when that person makes roughly 2 of those videos in a year, then releases one that's only 5 minutes long the following year, and instead goes off with some guy to make a Let's Play channel? People say that you're lazy, and that you need to make some of that sweet, delectable, nice content instead of that cringy, dumb other content. And what happens when someone who is full of spite and self-doubt is told that he needs to do something? Well, you can bet that they won't be doing that thing, at least for a couple of years that is. For now though, the year is still 2012. Mitt Romney was out to dethrone the waning in popularity Barack Obama, Maroon 5 was looking for some extra quarters to put in the payphone, and Arin Hanson was about to make the most successful decision of his life. The history of JonTron, the leprechaun murdering second Grump from 2012 to 2013, starts similarly to how Arin's did. He started out as a small-time Newgrounds animator of all things, specifically an animator of the lesser-known niche of internet content that surrounds onions. JonTron ended up making 6 of these onion animations, each one detailing the goings-ons in various onion characters' lives. Overall, the animations were nothing particularly special, though there is something very charming about seeing these early 2000s animations, just dripping with that foamy to squirrel style and raw XD humor. But the main reason I wanted to bring these up is that it gives a very rudimentary look into what would be Jon's comedic style in the coming years. While the first Onion video just has that standard edgy humor that was a dime a dozen during that time, the second one Jon made features one of his Onion characters waiting for his toast. He then cheers when the toast pops out of the toaster, only to be surprised that the toaster then produces a love note and some cash soon after. Now, this obviously isn't like Richard Pryor levels of comedy, but it kind of stood out as a relatively creative concept. This creativity continues into the life and death of an evil onion, the third Onion animation Jon would make. Here, we see the birth of an onion that starts off as the standard Newgrounds edgy silliness. The onion is born and then kills another onion, and then a sheep-looking thing, and it all goes how you would expect. That is until the onion kills the mother of a baby bird, which obviously it goes how the other ones do, where the onion chops the mother bird's head off and MS Paint red goes everywhere, but then it cuts back to the onion, who is now extremely old. He's now walking around with a cane, not really doing much. That is until a bird, presumably one of the baby birds now grown up, comes up to him and he has a heart attack and then immediately dies. That's when the bird gets on top of his dead onion body and starts pecking at his oniony corpse. Like I said before, these are really rudimentary, and I know most of you are sitting there thinking, why in the world is this guy analyzing these dumb onion videos? But I say to you, hey man, you're the one who's watching this video, so I don't know what to tell you. In any case, I think that these videos at least show that Jon has something interesting going on in that head of his. While you have to look through all the Newgroundsy paint and early 2000s rest, you can see someone who wants to entertain in a fundamentally unique way. The final video of the Onion Age, as I have dubbed it, is the only Onion video with reference to a video game, and may have been the catalyst for John's video game content in the coming years. Resident Onion, as you may be able to tell, is an Onion-based parody of Resident Evil 4, I believe. I'm not 100% sure because I've never played any Resident Evil game, but there is a skit that's referenced to Ashley and Leon, so... Anyway, the video takes another interesting approach, being done in a short skit-based format separated by static a la stick figures on crack. Here you can probably see John's comedic styling shine through the clearest, with some jokes you could probably see coming out of early JonTron episodes. One in particular is a skit with Salazar, where the scene playing out is Salazar being absorbed into Queen Plaga, which I guess was part of his plan, but like I said, I've never played any Resident Evil. So after being taken by the Queen, he immediately regrets his decision, complaining in a natural and sort of realistic way. Exactly the sort of thing you would find in an episode of Game Grumps if John and Arin had played Resident Evil 4. Sadly, with this episode, it marks the end of the Onion era, so we'll never see these weird onions again, but soon the onions of John's past will be nothing but a distant and fuzzy memory, because 4 years later, on August 31st, 2010, we would get the very first episode of the JonTron show. The infamous Daikatana review is a very interesting beast, very different from the newer gaming JonTron episodes and radically different from his current stuff, but we aren't going to be analyzing the entirety of JonTron's catalog in this video, only his association up to and including Game Grumps. Though I will say, compared to his later JonTrons, this video is really informative and focuses a little less on the jokes, though of course there are a few of those that he throws in that remind me of his time on the Grumps.
For you in the latter half, this next part is to get you up to speed. That's squash bean salad, and that's Daikatana.
But what really strikes me is how good John is on camera. He's not awkward at all, and he comes across as if he's done this plenty of times before. While he needs a bit of time to work on the presentation and style that we've come to expect from JonTron, you can really tell that John is just a guy who's naturally a performer. Fast forward to February 4th, 2011, 2 days after my 13th birthday by the way, so still waiting on those birthday wishes, and we get to the release of Dino City Bro, arguably the most iconic JonTron episode pre-Game Grumps, and the one that really started his rise to popularity. This isn't without good reason, as when you compare this episode to John's first episode, released less than a year earlier I might add, it's like night and day. The jokes are snappier, the editing is better, and the scripting is much more concise. You can really see JonTron's unique style and presentation shine through in this one. Many fans believe that this was the video that solidified the JonTron style, and I'd agree with that, but moreover, I think it shows how passionate John is and was about his show. Let me remind you again that this amount of improvement occurred in only the span of 5 months. In only 5 months, the show went from a relatively entertaining, mostly dry discussion on Daikatana, to a quick-paced, well-scripted and edited, semi-surreal comedy talking about some obscure dinosaur game. To kind of put that in perspective, I'm going to do something a little weird just because I don't want to potentially insult another YouTuber and compare this to my old content. If you go back to my first Those Dirty Memers episode on Kitty Dog, which was released in October of 2017, and compare it to my episode on Ghostface Nicole, released in February of 2018, the same amount of time between JonTron's Daikatana review and his Dino City review, you won't see nearly as much improvement, just objectively. Keep in mind that making these videos was wholly my main objective in my life during this time, so obviously I was trying to make them better, and there's some improvement you'll see, but not nearly the amount you saw with JonTron here. I only bring that up because I really do want to emphasize how clearly passionate John was about making these, and how he's genuinely talented at it. Disregarding that though, I did bring this episode up for another reason. Like I stated previously, this was the video that began JonTron's rise to popularity, and that could be attributed to the video hitting #1 on Reddit after it was posted there, meaning that it was on the front page of Reddit when anyone went on the website. From this popularity, JonTron caught the attention of none other than Arin Hanson. Arin was a big inspiration to John at the time, so when Arin subbed to JonTron, they immediately began exchanging messages. Arin then suggested that John come over to Burbank to quote, play Choo Choo Rocket, drink Dr. Pepper, and high five a lot.
You were like, yo, let's, I think you said, let's come down, let's drink Dr. Pepper, play Choo Choo Rocket, and high five a lot.
John obliged, and they started to meet up relatively frequently, becoming good friends throughout the coming months. After this success, John would release many more episodes of JonTron, improving the format with each episode. He even featured his new friend Arin in a video named Malkovich's Gaming Game Show, an episode of a short-ran series starring John putting on a weird accent and talking about things only tangentially related to video games. Not too much there besides the inclusion of Arin and the showing off of their natural chemistry together, but it also goes to show that John likes to make videos on things besides video games sometimes, and has some other interests he'd rather pursue video making on. From here, John looked to be on a pretty clear upward trajectory and started posting videos pretty frequently. After the release of Dino City, John would release some of the most iconic episodes of JonTron, such as his episodes on Birdemic, Bubsy, and Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. Soon, however, this wave of content would trickle to an almost complete halt, as Arin pitches an idea to John that ferments into the biggest thing John would ever be known for throughout his career. The idea of Game Grumps, as I'm sure most of you know, was conceived when Arin and John were arguing about the hit Nintendo classic Super Smash Bros. Brawl. In the game, there are the characters Fox, which you get right off the bat, and Wolf, which is a hidden character you have to unlock by doing some crazy stuff or something. I don't really know much about Super Smash Bros., but what I do know is that I was really disappointed when I unlocked Wolf as a kid, because the two characters had the exact same fighting style and moveset. I guess Arin and John were fighting about this, though I mean it's pretty cut and dry in my opinion, but as they are arguing, Ross O'Donovan, better known as Rubber Ross, remarked on how they tend to get grumpy with each other about games. This sparked an idea in Arin's head, the idea being to make a grumpy game-based podcast. But that idea was formed into a Let's Play channel soon after. And so, on July 18th, 2012, Game Grumps would debut to a thunderous applause from the general internet, almost immediately becoming a success, with the first video uploaded to this channel that, mind you, was not talked about or brought up at all prior to this first video, getting 100,000 views throughout its first day, and the channel itself gaining a whole 76,000 subs throughout the first 9 days after its conception. Keep in mind that this was back in 2012, when YouTube was less popular than it is today, and, at the time, neither John nor Arin were crazy popular yet, none of which having reached the coveted 1 million subscriber milestone. So these are some really crazy numbers for your first week of a Let's Play channel. That immediate popularity is not as surprising, however, when you take a deeper look into the type of audience both John and Arin had cultivated over the years. When taking a look at the Let's Play genre back in 2012, the mains were folks like PewDiePie and like Captain Sparkles, who were vastly different from their more relaxed and chilled out personas today. While nowadays you find almost universal praise for the two, disregarding the few ardent critics you'll find floating around of course, back in the day they were seen as extremely loud, very obnoxious, and just overall childish. This perception really extended to the entire Let's Play community, whether the criticism was justified or not. So much so that Arin back in 2011 would tweet out that if he ever makes a Let's Play channel to kill him, and I think that wholly encapsulates the vibe surrounding those sorts of channels at the time. Now what may be a surprise however is that the communities that Arin and John were a part of, i.e. the video game reviewer and animator folks, were the most ardent critics of these kinds of videos due to both the perception that I just described and the perceived lack of effort that goes into making that type of content. Keep in mind that despite a few errant tweets and comments, neither John nor Arin outright stated that they thought all of these things about Let's Play channels, but that doesn't really matter to my point that I'm going to make later. The idea that I want to get across is that John and Arin were perceived at the time as being above making that sort of content by their audience. Even though John started 2 Let's Play channels and abandoned them shortly before Game Grumps, but we don't talk about those. So with both John and Arin being perceived as out of the mainstream of the Let's Player community, the vibe of the show almost felt like the cool guys Let's Play. You know, the Let's Plays for the folks who hate Let's Plays sort of deal. And their perceived dislike of the genre kind of gave folks permission to sit back and enjoy what millions of 9 to 12-year-olds have been enjoying for the past couple of years, while still being able to feel like they were above the babies who watch PewDiePie yell at his screen for 20 minutes. Now, don't get me wrong, the Game Grumps had a wholly different comedic style and overall presentation than the PewDiePies and Captain Sparkles is of the time, which we'll talk about next, but I think the initial popularity could be partially attributed to the audience perception around them as creators. There's almost this unspoken, unconscious idea that this was just a side gig to both of them, to help the duo fund their real passions, which were JonTrons and sequelitises. Perhaps a little too unspoken, but again, we'll get to that. Taking a look at the first episode released on the Game Grumps channel, the first part of the Kirby Superstar playthrough, we see an extremely excited duo who are just rearing to get started. The chemistry between the two is almost immediately apparent, as both of them constantly make each other laugh and the goofs come a mile a minute. Genuinely, they both seem really excited, like they're having a great time, and while the first episode is a bit hectic, the format clicks with them really quickly as they continue through Kirby and the series they play simultaneously, Mega Man 7. As the show went on, the unique feeling of the show only solidified. It felt like you were sitting on the couch with Arin and John, joking around and having a good time while you were playing a game. Soon the format expanded to include 2-player games, starting with the ever-acclaimed Goof Troop for the SNES, and competitive games starting with the slightly less acclaimed Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Even with each of these slight format changes, the show was still the same grumpy fun we've come to love, with the release of what would become one of the more iconic series of the JonTron era, Pokemon Emerald, came something that seemed innocuous at the time, but would quickly become one of the most defining features of the Game Grumps. In Part 9 of Pokemon Emerald, there is a scene of John and Arin arguing about catching a Wingull, which is a Pokemon John particularly enjoys. Arin ends up running, leaving the beloved Waterbird behind, and John gets pissed, because the next Pokemon they encounter is a Tailo, which only evolves into a measly Spearow according to John, while Wingull evolves into the S-tier Pellistorm. This moment would become a pretty widely referenced and beloved scene between the two, and so Arin, using his animating prowess, decided to animate the 40-second clip and release it on the channel soon after. The animation, titled I Want a Wingull, was an immediate success and only furthered the ability of the channel to grow. This idea ended up being a genius move, as folks who didn't even watch Game Grumps could watch the clip out of its original context, which is animated and therefore more visually engaging than just watching a random clip of a Let's Play, and then go find the full episode to get the whole surrounding context, maybe even watching the entire series if the clip was enjoyable enough. This animated format was done once again a week later, by Arin again if you can believe it. This time a scene from their Mega Man 7 playthrough, where they make fun of how Proto Man tells you to use your flame weapon to burn through wooded areas in the level. The clip was once again a success, and further cemented the format of not only Game Grumps animated, but animating Let's Play clips as a whole I believe, since I really can't find any that existed before the Game Grumps animated theirs. The animations not only helped attract newcomers to Game Grumps, but helped cement the Game Grumps community, which was burgeoning with passion for their new favorite channel at the time. Clips that were particularly funny would be shared around, the particularly talented ones would animate those clips, which would then inspire more of the community to animate more clips. This sort of structure of animating Game Grumps clips would in the future become so popular that entire careers were built off of it, leading to more non-Game Grumps related prospects for those animators, but now I'm getting ahead of myself again. In the year of 2012, these animations were simply a good way to show your love for the community. After Arin animated 3 of these in the span of a couple weeks and an animation by Flannelson of their Animal Crossing playthrough was shown off, however, the flow of the animations of the channel would trickle to a crawl, with only 1 more by Flannelson and 2 more by Egoraptor being released on the channel before John's departure. I'm sure that there were more being made during that time, but it's possible they felt a little weird about hosting them on their channel besides the ones made by Ego, one of the hosts, and Flannelson, who they may have commissioned to make them. Oh, I did forget to mention one animator though. Barry ended up making one of these animations as well, which is a good transition into Barry's role as editor for the Game Grumps. Originally, the videos were edited by Arin, as in the first episode, Arin complains about John yelling super loud, and that he'll have to edit that for YouTube.
It didn't work.
You're a jerkwad. I'm gonna have to edit that so it's not ear wrenching.
However, that quickly became way too time consuming given their output of content, so they brought in longtime friend and then roommate of John, Barry Kramer, to help. Barry created the thumbnails, scheduled the uploads, and basically did everything for the Grumps besides actually recording the episodes, and so he can largely be credited for the style that the Game Grumps are known for today. The cool thing about Barry was also that since he was friends with the team, it wasn't like he was a completely unknown entity that just edits the videos in a presentable way. He would really become the third member of the team, with John and Arin talking to Barry during the episodes at points, and Barry having to respond using his now iconic heavily outlined yellow text. Not only that, he would sometimes take liberties in adding little jokes and edits that attenuated what was happening on screen. And of course there were also the classic Barry do this thing moments, where John and Arin would ask Barry to add in some dumb random thing and Barry would have no choice but to make it happen. Barry would stay on the show for a good long while, and I'm sure I'll bring him up again, but I just want to stress how important he was to the success and the identity of the show, especially in its early years. He had an amazing level of personality that shined through in his editing and, I believe, created the gold standard for anyone editing Let's Play content. Barry walked so folks like Lixian could run. Moving on to more structurally interesting aspects of the show, we have the games that they decided to play on the channel. While most Let's Players had a sort of bread and butter type of game they played, whether it was just 1 or 2 games like in Captain Sparkles' case, or it was the more broader genre of horror and rage games like PewDiePie back in the day, the Game Grumps really played anything and everything. Granted, they did stay away from modern AAA games for the most part, so maybe the theming was originally supposed to be retro-inspired. In any case, the Game Grumps were playing a lot of games you wouldn't see any other Let's Players playing at the time. Like I said, there were lots of older games, but even just weird or overall bad games. One thing that I was really drawn to was, while they did have the long-running playthroughs, a big chunk of their content was playing strange one-off games like Mary-Kate and Ashley's Sweet 16 and Clay Fighter 63 1/3. These I believe helped a lot with their growth as well, as newcomers may be intimidated to start with part 10 of Mega Man 7, but just watching them play a weird game where Mary-Kate drives a car around takes very little commitment, and is an easy way to get a feel for if you'll like their content or not. The one-off and weird games have always been my favorite things to watch on their channel, mostly for the previously stated ease of accessibility, but also because I love watching games barely work, and seeing the Grumps try to make sense out of a game clearly cobbled together with nothing but an E-Tower 466LX and a dream is really entertaining. Now, while quite a few series were beloved in the John age, I'd be hard-pressed not to mention Sonic 06, the Grumps' first foray into the world of Sonic. For those who may be unaware, Sonic 06 is an extremely infamous game, even more so back in the day. If you were to ask someone about the worst games ever made back in 2012, it'd be a rarity to find someone who doesn't at least mention Sonic 06. This was for good reason, however, as the game was overall a complete mess. It was glitchy, the gameplay flowed really badly, the story was strange and awkward, and for some reason the game really wanted this princess to be desperately attracted to this goofy looking hedgehog creature. Now, for as bad as this game is, it was absolutely perfect for one thing: an ironic Let's Play starring two guys who like to make fun of games. There are very few times a Let's Play of all things becomes iconic. Even the top players very rarely achieve that status, with the only ones I can think of reaching that level of YouTube history that the Sonic 06 playthrough found itself in, being Markiplier's first FNAF playthrough, i.e. the warning scariest game in years meme, and PewDiePie's first Amnesia playthrough. There's a point in each successful Let's Play channel's lifespan where they find their game, the game where everything clicks, and they find the game that works best for their personality and commentary style. Sometimes they find their game early, like with PewDiePie and Amnesia, and sometimes it takes a little bit, like with Markiplier and FNAF, but eventually, no matter how long it takes, every big name in the Let's Play space needs to find the game that works best for them, and I believe that Sonic 06 was the one for the Grumps. At least with John and Arin. This is no better exemplified than with the iconic clip of John getting stuck while playing Knuckles in the game. To set up context, I believe that the Game Grumps purposefully did extremely long sessions with Sonic 06 at a time, in order to preserve that feeling of the sort of endurance test that's trying to get through Sonic 06. Throughout most of the game, they're really just trying the best they can, fighting with the game's controls and trying to figure out how the game works, mostly telling stories and making fun of the absurdity of what's going on. Eventually, they reach a lava level that has a big platforming element, which is made extremely difficult due to the way the game tracks your momentum, causing you to have a hard time controlling how fast you're going and when you can stop, making the Grumps die so they have to really concentrate on the game. They then go to a section in the lava level where they play as Knuckles, who, in contrast to Sonic's sporadic and jittery movement, is extremely floaty and tends to just fly around doing a goofy Superman pose. As they're trying to figure out how to open a door, and realize they need to go back and illuminate all these weird orb things, basically realizing they need to backtrack through half of the level, they both just seem done with the game, and John starts remarking on how absurd Knuckles' gliding animation is until, for some reason, Knuckles just shoots up in the air and sticks to a stalactite, glitching onto it and getting stuck.
Oh, okay. Arin, don't leave.
This leads to the now iconic moment of Arin leaving and John giving him a motivational speech to come back.
I can't do it, John. I can't either. I can't fucking do it. I'll tell you what, Arin. You can give up now, or you can see it out, because I certainly can't do it without you, and I know you can't do it without me.
It was the perfect recipe of events that culminated in one of the greatest moments in Game Grumps history, and that moment was no exception, as many other now widely quoted memes and moments came from the series, such as Silver's "It's no use!"
Thank you. Dude, okay. He just keeps saying it's no use. I mean, he's true, he's right.
and the infamous snowboard level.
What? Why? What?
Unfortunately, John and Arin would never be able to finish their Let's Play of Sonic 06 after a whopping 108 parts, because on June 25th, 2013, Game Grumps would release their now infamous video, Ode to John. It was a dark day for Game Grumps. Fans didn't know what to think of the new host, but they can rest assured that everything was fine between John and Arin. Hold on. Wait, that's weird. It kinda looks like John's segment was recorded from somewhere else. Huh. I wonder why that is. On May 15th, 2015, a little less than 2 years after John had left GameGrumps, a channel by the name of ConspiracyGrumps released a video titled Compilation of Game Grumps Weirdness following John's departure. The video contained many excerpts from various podcasts and panels where the elusive Game Grumps question was asked or brought up in some way. Each time, the question was either dismissed or talked about in such a way that made it clear something deeper was going on.
Unfortunately, I don't think... No, I won't be returning to Game Grumps. Sorry. That's a final.
For the folks who didn't experience this era during the transition, it's hard to make out what a big deal this was in the community. It wasn't just fanboys hating Arin for no reason, or people thinking that some deep thing had to have happened without any rhyme or reason. There was just something so insanely weird about what was going on. Game Grumps during the John era was known for being extremely open and welcoming to the community. Think back to the animateds that were promoted by the duo, and all the fan interaction during that time. Hell, that was one of the reasons the show got so popular in the first place, and for this once extremely open and honest seeming channel to effectively do what a corporate 80s sitcom would do and kill off a character without mentioning them ever again was really strange. To top it off, when asked why John left, the current Game Grumps staff would give a sort of platitude answer, and that he left to work on JonTron, which clearly wasn't the whole story when talking to John, who seemed to be gagged on the subject.
I cannot comment on this matter. I am sorry. This is a restricted matter.
Then, for the Game Grumps staff to dismiss any mentions of something weird going on as just wacko theories, and the person who left the show seeming to be on board with the theories, it's just hard to explain how nutty this all was, since nowadays weird drama about people grooming fans and doing weird stuff with the people who are grooming fans is all over the place, and you hear about it every 20 minutes. This wasn't another one of those situations. This was a situation where you knew something weird was going on, but you just couldn't get a complete answer. If you want a full, in-depth explanation of all the stuff that went down during this time and all the specific events that occur, I'd highly recommend Cassette's video, The Real Reason John Left the Game Grumps, which is just an hour-long deep dive into this very specific topic, which is why I don't want to go over all the specifics here because I would just be rehashing what he says. I will, however, mention the most interesting bits that I experienced back in the day and give my own take on why I believe John left the Grumps. Now, I had only become aware of the conspiracy after the release of that video in 2015. Before that, I just stopped watching the Grumps because, like many folks, I like John, and this Danny guy seemed like some weird rocker guy. Not to mention he was quite a bit older than Arin, so I thought it would be like watching Rhett and Link play games. So I didn't even really give him a chance. I'll talk more about the initial reactions to Danny later, but all you need to know is that I had completely taken the Game Grumps out of my mind immediately after John left. The video in 2015 kind of intrigued me, but I still thought that maybe this was just people looking into stuff a bit too deeply. After all, why would Dan and Arin mention John since he was off the show and all? The main premise of the argument that there was just some grand conspiracy to not mention John just didn't really convince me all that much. In my head, Dan and Arin just wanted to do Game Grumps and John just didn't want to ever go back to the Grumps. It all seemed pretty copacetic to me. This was until Super Mario 3D World Part 18 was released, and the Lovelies had noticed something very interesting about particular interaction once they had passed World 5-4.
Bacon! Where is Oh, that's the wrong one. It's just like, bacon!
Look, it's a beautiful level.
Okay. Alright.
Marvelous.
I don't care what you're doing.
Yeah!
Alright, whatever. I don't give a shit.
It seems like something just flips with Arin's mood. 1 second he's laughing about someone's username, and then he starts mumbling about how he doesn't care about something. It's not until Dan starts making a joke about Toad's territorial call that he perks up again, and all seems well, but clearly something happened in that moment that made him upset. Did he not think it was a beautiful level? Maybe he didn't think it was very pretty. Possibly, he simply didn't like all of Brandon's bunny stamps. Given how no one could possibly hate those cute little bunny stamps, something more had to be going on, and the Conspiracy Grumps were here to investigate. First, they noticed something immediately out of place. In Miiverse, you cannot submit blank posts, and yet, Chuckles seems to have done the impossible. Thankfully, this was when the Miiverse was still active, and so researchers could corroborate each post in the stream, and each post seemed to be legit, until we got to Jakey Me, who seems to really like Mario jumping through bricks to get mushrooms. In actuality, this mushroom post was not set to appear yet, and was likely used to cover the original post. As for the blank post, the folks later found out that it seems like you can post a blank post, but they just get deleted by moderators at some point. So the trigger into this investigation seems to be an error, but something did clearly get Arin upset, and we know for a fact that Jakey Me wasn't set to have this post come up yet. The real post that was set to show up was from someone who simply went by the name of Sam, and this was the post that Arin saw. Oh yeah, this is what got me on board, and I remember the uncovering of this information fondly. This outright confirmed that the Grumps, for some reason, purposefully did not want to acknowledge JonTron. Now normally if someone had left a show and there's a post simply asking you to acknowledge them, you would have no problem just being like, oh hey yeah, that person existed, and if they did that, all of this would have just fallen away. And yet, something happened that was so hurtful, so tragic, that the Grumps simply could not have a post mentioning JonTron on their channel. Something so upsetting that even seeing that post causes Arin to immediately get upset. And the most damning piece of evidence?
Let's make, yeah.
We couldn't get the Wi-Fi working in the new Grump room.
So we don't have fucking meat first post?
I'm sorry. We tried our best.
In the next set of recording sessions, from part 37 onwards, the Wi-Fi in the new Grump recording room mysteriously stopped working. Now you may be thinking, wait, but the JonTron thing happened in part 18. Why wouldn't they just stop the post on part 19 or something? Well, that's exactly what I thought, but keep in mind that these parts are recorded in very large chunks. The recording chunk between part 18 to part 37 is at most 7.5 hours, so it wouldn't be unreasonable for them to do part 18, see the JonTron post, have Barry do some editing magic and hope that no one even notices the post, and just play as normal. Then, once the episodes got released and they're going to record their chunk starting with part 37, they notice that the acknowledged JonTron post has been recovered and mentioned in the comments, and, due to the Streisand effect, this would most likely cause way more people to start doing JonTron posts in hopes they come on during the GameGrumps playthrough. Therefore, since the series is almost over anyway, they just turn off the Wi-Fi for the remaining parts 37 to 59. So, this proves a few things. A. Things did not end amicably with John because there would be no reason for the Grumps to go to these lengths to prevent John mentions. B. The Grumps know that things did not end amicably and that we're desperate to learn the truth. And C. It's knowing about Fuji. So that was the piece of evidence that got my noggin jogging on the Grumps side. But if John were just as keen not to mention the Game Grumps as the Grumps were about mentioning John, then this just kind of like seems mean, right? I mean, maybe John did want to distance himself from the Grumps, and they both just don't want to acknowledge each other due to personal reasons. That's fine, I can live with that. Maybe we just shouldn't pry, guys. But no, that wasn't the case at all. John genuinely seemed like he wanted to talk about what happened. I mean, he was really keen on stirring the pot and would even retweet significant evidence that was found, such as the Miiverse post we just discussed. He was also a relatively frequent flyer on the ConspiracyGrumps subreddit, softly confirming some speculation without saying too much due to a pretty clear gag order put on him. On July 25th, 2013, Arin would make a post on the GameGrumps subreddit, basically talking about the current state of the channel and how great of a time he's having with Danny. A redditor then replies to his post, talking first about how great it is that Arin is having a good time, but then moving on to ask about the elephant in the room. Why haven't you acknowledged JonTron since he left? Arin replies, in short, saying that JonTron left the show and that he doesn't want to be anchored to it anymore. He states that's a similar situation to how Billy Bob Thornton blew up on an interviewer who kept asking about his music when he wanted to move on and be an actor, and that the only reason they don't want to mention JonTron is because John wants to distance himself from the Grumps. The community seemed to accept this response, and Arin was applauded for his transparency for the time being. However, on September 25th, 2013, John would make his own post on the subreddit. In John's post, he would in no uncertain terms state that he's being spoken for in Arin's post, and that he genuinely likes when the Grump community talks about him. He goes on to say that he appreciates the fans he made on the Game Grumps, and that he definitely doesn't appreciate that Arin is trying to make it seem as if John wanted to abandon his Game Grumps fans. He also states that he in no way finds joy in his fan base of 1 year completely abandoning him and no longer speaking of him, and caps it off with a reply to a comment discussing the rule that prevents JonTron related posts, with a clear statement, "I'm not trying to put Game Grumps behind me, but maybe they are?" Food for thought. Like I said at the beginning of this part, this is just a kiddie pool's level of depth on what proved to be a Mariana's Trench of information on the topic, so I will shout out Cassette's video once again if you want that in-depth information. From only the few pieces of evidence I presented, however, we can tell that the John departure both wasn't as amicable as the Grumps wanted to make it seem, and that John wanted to talk about what happened, but for some reason couldn't. Thankfully, the vibes around this controversy would shift upon the release of Pokemon Fire Red Part 109 on February 9th, 2015. After 2 long years of shenanigans, tomfoolery, and overall mischief to prevent JonTron's name from even being spoken on the show, Dan casually brings up how this is now officially the longest running series on the channel, and shouts Jon out, talking about him for a good 30 seconds before reflecting on his time thus far on the show.
Think John's gonna be sad that he no longer holds the record?
Probably.
No, he'll be fine.
No.
He loves it. What's up, Johnny boy? We love you, girl.
Hey, baby.
How you doing?
Give me a kiss.
Give me some of your sweet sexy.
Hey, stop.
What was weird was how not awkward and, like I said, casual it all was, almost as if there wasn't even conspiracy in the first place. It was a bit off-putting, but it was really exciting to hear the forbidden name uttered on the show after so long, and so many perceived harsh feelings. This small mention, however, would be dwarfed in December 15th of that very same year, with the release of the finale of Jon's long-running Star Wars series, Starcade. At the very end, after Vader kills Palpatine using a particularly buffed humanoid jock, it is revealed that Vader, the person who had been enslaving Jon and forcing him to review Star Wars media the last 6 months, was none other than his previous co-host, Arin Hanson. The scene plays out almost as an apology from Arin to Jon, obviously because he was the antagonist of the series, but perhaps there is more truth to the apology than scripted lines. Jon makes Arin call himself a
Poo-poo, pee-pee, fart, diaper, baby, stinky, asshole, doo-doo brain.
since he was the one who wrote his lines, but overall they both agree in the scene that they are doing well and implicitly that there are no hard feelings. Hype was at an all-time high, and the conspiracy was finally bookended since Jon and Arin were friends again. For about a year and a half until Jon made his racist comments and yada yada, but whatever, the point is that they're friends again and that there is no need to care about what happened to make Jon leave. Right? November 3rd, 2014. Talented Lobster would make a post on Conspiracy Grumps narrowing down the singular incident that caused Jon to leave to be at E3 2013. To run through this evidence shortly, June 11th, the first day the Grumps were at the convention, Jon and Arin are there and everything seems normal. June 12th, Jon isn't at the convention, and Arin does a Game Station stream that was supposed to be starting the Grumps without Jon. June 13th, Jon isn't at the convention because he's sick. June 14th, nothing. June 15th, the Game Grumps Twitter released a statement saying they have to only upload 1 Game Grumps episode a day for a bit. June 25th, Ode to Jon is released announcing his departure from the Grumps. The evidence was damning. Something had to have happened at E3 that year that caused Jon to take the plunge and leave the Grumps. Further confirming Talented Lobster's theory was Jon himself, simply replying to the post saying, "Damn, you guys are good." This then quickly became the canon theory, with most believing that something happened during E3 that caused Jon to quickly move to New York and leave the Grumps. We still don't know exactly what specifically happened, but I think I have a decent explanation of the events, and it came to me when I was watching one particular video during the Jon era, Pacific Rim Behind the Scenes. Released the day before the Ode to Jon video was made public, this video was very out of character for the Game Grumps channel. Instead of really doing anything related to gaming, in this video the Grumps talked to a special effects artist who is working on Pacific Rim of all things, and kinda just talk to him about what he does and have him show the audience the stuff he creates for the movie. Now there were a few problems with this video. It was extremely dry and not very entertaining at all for one. It had nothing to do with the Game Grumps besides them doing this weird contest for the movie where the audience helps them build a Pacific Rim robot guy. And most importantly for this context, Jon very clearly did not want to be there. While Arin was trying to build rapport with this guy and do his job in interviewing him, Jon was kinda just zoning out and trying to seem like he was interested when he clearly wasn't. There's even a moment where they're listening to the special effects guy talk about how he made the gloves the guys wear in the movie, I think, and once he starts getting all technical, Jon literally looks at the camera and gives the clearest nonverbal communication stating that he could not care less about what this guy is talking about. Now that's not to say Jon didn't have any good moments and he was just pouting. He was still trying to be entertaining, but man, you can tell how little he wanted to do this, and herein lies the crux of what I believe happened between Jon and Arin. Jon is, obviously, extremely passionate about making JonTron. That's like his thing, and like I said previously, it's what he's really good at. If you look at Jon's channel up until Game Grumps started, it seemed like he was really just hitting his stride, and he was honestly killing it. But when he was doing Game Grumps, uploads slowed to a crawl, with only 2 episodes being released that year, which was a long time for JonTron releases back then. Let's compare that to Arin, who is pretty obviously starting to phase animating out of his content up until the Game Grumps. Now granted, he still did make a few, but it was clear that Arin saw Game Grumps as the thing that he wanted to do. and back in the day, he saw it as the thing that John and him would be doing together. Imagine that you're Arin. You start this new project with a really good friend that you see is growing exponentially and getting really popular. You start being able to do interviews, you get sponsorships from big movies, you have merchandise, and you're doing it all with one of your closest friends, who you see as being with you all the way. Sure, in the beginning your friend says that he just wants to do this for a bit and then go back to his older content, but that's what your plan was as well. But after all this explosive growth and the great times we're having, how could he possibly want to go back? This is clearly the biggest thing either of you have ever done. Then, just as things start getting more real and you start doing some big time entertainment stuff, your friend just seems to be phoning it in. He's being impulsive, he's not refining himself for the public, he isn't getting that now this is more than just you and him sitting on a couch playing games. You both got lightning in a bottle, and yet your friend just seems to want to let it all pass. Finally, here comes the big event. The time to really start getting the channel into the entertainment industry. E3 2013. The plan is to go there, meet with fans, talk with creators, and get on a podcast with the game station. Do the stuff that the big players on YouTube do. Then, on the first night of this multi-day long event, your friend gets absolutely blasted.
Party. Oh, right, cause you got really drunk before Grump Day, and I was like kind of upset about it.
Oh, were you?
Yeah.
Were you really?
Yeah.
I just forgot it was Grump Day the next day, I think.
Yeah.
I honestly, I just forgot.
Cause I was like, he's gonna be hungover tomorrow.
I wasn't, though.
That was it. Yeah. Well, we also started later, and you slept in.
So blasted, in fact, that he misses the podcast that you're both scheduled to be on the next day. He doesn't meet with friend of the channel and industry player Grant Kirkhope, and he misses the entire rest of the convention. You then call him up, pissed that he's not taking any of this seriously, pissed that he has such little impulse control that he gets completely wasted while on what is essentially a work conference. You tell him in no uncertain terms that he's ruining the reputation of what you both worked so hard to create. He responds, essentially saying that he doesn't care and that all he wants to do is work on JonTron. He says that you've been taking control of all the business decisions, you haven't been consulting him on anything, and you just act like he's below you in some way, and he can't control himself. The nerve of him to say that. Of course you're doing all the business decisions because you actually care about the channel. Of course I'm taking over everything. You can barely make it through a behind the scenes video with a special effects artist. And of course you can't control yourself. You can't even make it to a podcast featuring our channel because you got too drunk the night prior. He scoffs. Okay, well, since I don't do anything and actively hurt our image, why don't I just leave the channel? Like I said, I just want to make JonTrons anyway. You pause, and you tacitly agree with him. You then get off the phone and call up a lawyer to draft up articles of an amendment document with a standard NDA, just so he doesn't leave and actively hurt your company, even though you don't really think he will, so you can officially transfer the business to yourself. On June 14th, you get your friend to sign the document and officially transfer ownership to you, maybe after some back and forth on the wording and possible settlements. It's sad, but I guess your friend did say he wanted to go back to making JonTron. Now's the time to plan out his departure and merge in a new co-host. You call your friend the next day to plan things out, and, to your shock, he is now in New York. You beg him to come back. You plead, saying that you need more time to transition him out of the show, but he won't budge, and you realize there's no way you're going to convince him to come back. In your head, you had months to plan this all out and slowly merge in the new host after making many more episodes with your friend, but now, thanks to his impulsivity, that timetable has shifted dramatically. You only have a handful of episodes with your friend that you haven't uploaded, maybe enough for like 10 days, so you immediately make a decision on the new co-host and beg your friend to just shoot a little send-off message, just for the fans, you say, and he agrees. You then tweet out that, for the time being, your channel can only upload one video a day and immediately begin shooting for the send-off video, introducing your new host, who was originally just going to do a companion series, but now has to quickly become one of the main faces of the channel. Okay, so it probably didn't go exactly like that, but that's just what I think makes the most sense. That's why Arin didn't want to mention JonTron. That's why he made it out to seem like John wanted to put the show behind him. I mean, after all, he did impulsively flee the state to get away from doing it anymore. And that's why for a while, he just wanted to make it out like he never even existed. Because it was his company now, and John walked out on him. This also explains why John never really seemed super upset about it until Arin started speaking for him. In John's head, Arin didn't really like him on the show that much anyway, and he was just doing what was best for the company. John didn't see it in the same way Arin did, so went on his way to just let Arin do whatever he wants for the show. After all, he mostly does like working on JonTron. Finally, this is also why John actively wanted to talk about it, even though he couldn't because of the NDA. He wanted to make it clear to the fans that he didn't just want to abandon the show. He wanted to say how Arin wanted Game Grumps to be this certain way, and he left because Arin was being controlling over his life and how he acted. With the Grumps just saying that John left to work on JonTron, which in their head is what happened, it makes it seem like John just abandoned the whole thing and didn't care, which is what Arin always accused John of doing. Now, I'm sure there are some hanging chads in my theory, but in the end, it doesn't really matter all that much since John would never and will never be mentioned in a positive light on the show again, because of the aforementioned political stuff.
Than poor whites.
So they probably hate each other now more than they ever did in all honesty, but thus ends one of the most convoluted and frankly fascinating controversies of Game Grumps. Hell, even of the internet to be honest. But now it's time to move on to the next chapter of the Game Grumps, and as the ever illustrious Chris Marola observed, you know what they say, out with the old, in with the Jew! On June 25th, 2013, the Game Grumps community was introduced to the new co-host of the show, Leigh Daniel Avidan, better known as Dan Avidan. The guy almost went to an orgy that one time. Before he started grumping around, the New Jersey-born musician was mainly known for his comedy rock band Ninja Sex Party, which he ran with keyboardist/theoretical physicist Brian Wecht. The band mainly consisted of songs reminiscent of Lonely Island and Flight of the Conchords, with the interesting twist being the genre would mainly focus on synth rock and purposeful cliches of the 70s and 80s glam rock scene. The band was pretty popular, though still hasn't risen to the fame of the band's main inspirations as of yet. Besides Ninja Sex Party, however, Dan is one half of the alt-rock duo Skyhill, which he does with Peter Lennox, and a third of the band Starbomb, which he runs with none other than Arin Hanson and longtime partner Brian Wecht. At the time when he was first introduced to Game Grumps, Dan was someone the majority of the lovelies would not be familiar with. This isn't to say Arin picked Dan out of the blue though, as he'd been a fan of Ninja Sex Party for a long while, even animating one of their music videos, Dinosaur Laser Fight, in 2011. Now this next part isn't necessarily confirmed, though it's commonly believed that Dan was always going to be on the show in some capacity, being on the sister show Steam Train with Ross, while John and Arin would originally be the hosts of the main Grump show. However, after all the insanity that I talked about in the last section, Dan had to be brought in as quickly as possible. I won't talk much about the sister shows until the next section, but I did want to bring up that this means Dan had to take the place of two co-hosts immediately upon being hired, which for such a huge channel is an absolutely insane amount of responsibility, and I can't imagine how nervous he was upon recording those first two series with Ross and Arin. That being said, the first real episode that Dan would be a part of was the inaugural episode of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Now this episode was very understandably a little awkward. Arin is trying to move Dan along and Dan is very clearly trying to do a good job, but you can definitely tell that he's trying to be funny and not just letting things roll as he normally would. The initial reaction to this episode though would be intense to say the least. It's hard to say if the reaction can even be considered much, since most of the hate towards this episode is solely because Dan is not John, and I'm sure many Game Grumps fans initially didn't even watch the episode and disliked it out of spite. Like I said before, this was a guy that not many in the Grumps community would have recognized, and back in the day you would click on his channel and just see weird music videos and stuff like that. Nothing remotely palatable for the standard Game Grumps watcher. Immediately from the get-go, you could tell that Dan was not a gamer, and not a member of the communities that John and Arin were a part of. Even on the first episode of the show, less than 2 minutes in, Arin asks Dan his favorite game, and he can't think of one.
Well, then what's your favorite?
Fuck.
It's not a game.
It is. It's a game to me. Shit, man, I don't know.
You can kind of tell he's internally panicking when he's asked this question, and is just trying to think of one. So after a bit of thinking, he says the first Legend of Zelda is his favorite, which is an extremely safe choice that he most likely thought would upset the least amount of people.
This has to be up there. Legend of Zelda, probably, the first one.
Arin then questions Dan, being like,
Really? Your favorite game of all time?
and Dan just says,
It's kind of the best ever, don't you?
showing that he was trying to say the objective right answer instead of actually his favorite. Herein kind of lies the first problem with Dan's initial introduction. He seemed like he just wasn't the guy to do this sort of thing. The original vibe of the Grumps was the feeling of playing a game on the couch with your two friends who are also greasy video game gremlins like you. Now comes this guy who's attractive, has a successful band, and doesn't even know much about video games coming in, and taking a place of someone who is very clearly a true blue gamer.
I put a hole in that.
It would be so funny, John.
I put a hole in that.
Why do I want to hear from this guy who's like a popular, socially confident rock star who, I'm sure, already gets tons of fans fawning after him 24/7? Whether this perception was accurate or not didn't matter. All that mattered was that this guy was not one of them. In an alternate reality where we get someone like Ross to take the place of John, hell, or even Barry for that matter, I think the initial reaction would be much better. Ross was already known for his video game animations like Arin was, and Barry was already a big part of the show as an editor, and clearly knew the humor and style well. Now in retrospect, mind you, I don't think these would have been good choices. Arin and Ross have a more purposefully antagonistic relationship and wouldn't come across well as the two-friend archetype, and Barry didn't really want to be in that sort of role as of yet, with the points where Barry would be in a co-hosting role not coming until Table Flip in December of 2013. I just believe that the idea of choosing Danny, who wasn't even in the same realm of content, or didn't even have a remotely comparable personality to John, was a pretty risky decision. This discordance with the previous vibe of the show can best be encapsulated by its new intro, which is kind of ironic considering Danny is actually a really great singer. I won't go over every new intro like I did with my Good Mythical Morning video, but I just thought it was interesting how during the time when Danny and Arin's comedic styles were still trying to mesh, the intro itself is very shrill and out of tune, even compared to John's intro. It was just something about Danny's voice doing the same inflection as John, whereas Arin didn't change his part at all, that just caused the pitch to be a little wonky. I now know this intro issue was caused by Arin just using the exact same intro song and then replacing John's part with Danny singing the same part, but it just goes to show how rushed everything needed to be. Thankfully, the intro was eventually re-recorded and sounds even better than the original, with Dan and Arin doing a fun harmony with one another, which was really appreciated. And even more appreciated was today's sponsor, these 3 episodes of Game Grumps I want to talk about. These 3 episodes represent the points of Dan where he became fully accepted, carved out his comedic niche, and fully established himself as, in my opinion, the best possible choice as Arin's co-host. First off, I'd like to mention Super Mario Bros. 2 Part 5, released on July 2nd, just a week after Danny's first episode, and we can already see that Dan is getting much more confident in his commentary, and he's really getting the hang of the Game Grumps style, though many fans have not been swayed as of yet. That is until 4 minutes into this episode, where Dan mentions that Luigi looks like he's holding his hands on his suspenders, staring off into the scene before him.
Now I'm just standing here with my hand on my suspenders like, well, this is a fine pickle.
This brings about a skit very akin to the best of the JonTron era, where both of them laugh about the idea of Luigi becoming an old-timey mayor.
A fine day for mayoring. If I do say so myself. Oh, death approaches. Death approaches. Better skedaddle. 1, 2. Ah! This is a fine mess of turnips we've gotten ourselves into.
And the viewers loved it. It immediately became an iconic moment in Game Grumps history, and is mentioned in funniest moment compilations even to this day. Taking a look at the comments, many marked this moment as the moment where everyone accepted Dan as being the new co-host, and it was all around a very wholesome moment. I'm sure Dan was super happy when he saw how much everyone enjoyed this Super Mario 2 moment, and was able to relax a little bit in the future. Here's the thing though, I think the reason this skit was so beloved at the time was because it was, like I said, a very JonTron era joke. Danny at the time was clearly still nervous and was trying to emulate that type of humor, and Arin hadn't adjusted to the new style Danny brought to the table, so I'm sure that he subconsciously influenced it. Not to say that this wasn't a great moment and that Danny wasn't comfortable, of course. I love this moment in the show, but I think specifically at this moment Danny was emulating, whether consciously or not, the JonTron era still, and not bringing forward his own style. Keep in mind that this was only a week after his first episode, and likely recorded even earlier than that, since the Grumps record their episodes in chunks, so it would make sense that Danny hadn't completely developed his Game Grumps style as of yet, and was just trying to do the best he could. As for the next episode I wanted to discuss, I was debating between 3 iconic early Dan episodes, and while I ultimately decided to talk about one in particular, I did want to briefly go over those other 2, as they are pretty iconic. Mickey Mousecapades was released on July 18, 2013, and was immediately a hit. Dan had been on the show for a little over a month now, and so he was definitely feeling more confident in his commentary, though from the beginning it was clear that this was going to be a different kind of episode.
Mickey Mouse.
The backstory is this. Arin and Dan looked up a walkthrough of Mickey Mousecapades prior to recording the episode, and they found a particularly angry review of the game a la Angry Video Game Nerd. These kinds of YouTubers were a dime a dozen back in the day, since Angry Video Game Nerd was so popular, and as such, the sort of style that they did became immediately recognizable, particularly for how badly they missed the mark when compared to James Ralph's content. Evidently, the person that Dan and Arin found was such a bad imitation of James' style that they thought it was hilarious, and throughout the whole episode, Arin decided he wanted to just talk like he was one of those reviewers the whole time, which Dan found hysterical.
My God. So you get your girlfriend back, but she doesn't even do anything. Why would you even want to get her back? Bitch.
It honestly is one of my favorite episodes of Game Grumps, but I think that it doesn't explore how Dan came into his own as of yet, since Arin was the star of that episode, and Dan was more of the guy egging him on and laughing hysterically the whole time. Now don't get me wrong, I still think this shows how good Dan is as a co-host, where he can just sort of let funny things continue to be funny, even though he's not the one getting the attention, which is pretty hard to do. If John were there, he would most likely riff off of Arin and do the impression as well, or just start to get annoyed at it, but here, Dan lets Arin take the spotlight and just continues playing the game and laughing along, because he knows how funny of a bit it is. And to be fair, his enjoyment of the skit really is what makes it so funny. The next episode I was considering was Amazing Frog, which came out on November 10th of 2013. This was an episode recorded at the end of a particularly long Grump session, so both of the duo are extremely tired and out of it, which kind of introduced us to Sleepy Grumps, since I don't think John and Arin ever did episodes where they were super tired. It's a pretty beloved episode, and everyone in the comments seems to put this at the very top of their proverbial Game Grumps tier list, but I honestly don't like this episode all that much. Not to say it's a bad episode, but it just didn't really tickle me that much, and I generally like the Sleepy Grumps, like when they're playing Pokemon Fire Red and go through the Safari Zone while they're both barely awake, but I guess I just don't really like those sort of goat simulator type of games very much. Again, everyone seems to really like this episode, and it's a really popular one from the early Dan era, but I just didn't love it, so I didn't want to come across as disingenuous if I talk about how great this episode was for Dan. Now for the episode I actually went with, Super Mario Sunshine Part 9, which was released on August 9th, 2013. I actually really enjoyed the whole Super Mario Sunshine series, so you can take this as a recommendation to watch all of it. But I believe that Part 9 in particular showed the strengths of Dan and where his involvement in the show would take Game Grumps in the future. In the episode, Dan talks about the last episode of the hit Spanish animated series David the Gnome. In it, he talks about how, spoiler alert, our titular gnome and his wife die at the end and turn into trees.
Dude, they fucking die. Like, he and his wife die. Like, of old age. And so, like, they say goodbye to all their forest friends. They hug everyone goodbye. And then they turn into trees.
Dan then begins discussing how after he learned about death, he started to live a more fulfilling life, only after clarifying that this may be too deep for Game Grumps.
Maybe this is too deep for Game Grumps, I don't know. But I feel like I started living like a more fulfilling life when I realized I was gonna die. Because I was like, you know what? I got a limited amount of time here, so I'm just gonna do a lot of fucking cool shit all the time and do exactly what I want.
This isn't the particular moment I want to analyze, but I did want to mention that a more serious and solemn discussion about life is not something you would ever get from the John era. The John era was more focused on skits and making jokes about things, as it would be since it's a comedic Let's Play, but Dan being more open to talking about less comedic things and being more serious really changed the course of the Game Grumps in the future. Of course, they then go on to talk about how weird it is that porn is legal but prostitution isn't, since the only difference is that you're filming it. Dan then goes on to talk about how he would never be able to hire a lady of the night, which leads him to ask Arin if he's ever told him that he was invited to an orgy once. Arin then starts laughing and Dan is baffled about how he hasn't told him this, asking if it's a Game Grumps appropriate story.
Did I not tell you this? Is this a Game Grumps appropriate story?
I guess?
I guess it is. I didn't do it.
I won't go on to retell the whole story here, so go watch the episode yourself if you're interested, but it's a really funny scenario that was honestly really well told. More than how well it was told though, John told good stories as well, like the IKEA car crash story. It was the plain fact of it being a really interesting story that caught my attention. This is where the fact that Dan wasn't a part of the sort of community that the Grumps or Arin was a part of switched from being a detriment to a positive. I mean, it probably isn't much of a surprise that John and or Arin never got invited to an orgy with an underground group of New York swingers before. They were too busy playing games, making videos, or in Arin's case being on weird TV shows, but Dan was actually kind of a Chad. Dan was the kind of guy to get invited to a 20-person orgy by his lesbian girlfriends, consisting of the most elite and attractive people, and turn it down because he doesn't want an STD. Then after dropping this bombshell, just say,
Okay. Oh, next time on Game Grumps, yeah, we'll get that bird cloud thing.
Like that wasn't just a completely nutty experience. Needless to say, this became a well-beloved episode, and spawned a good amount of love for Dan in the community, but even more so than that, the strength of the episode was solely due to Danny being able to relay a crazy story in such a compelling way. This was something that John never did, and would be unique to Danny, something that set him completely apart from the previous hosts. This brings me to the final episode of the Dan era I want to bring up. The episode that I believe perfectly encapsulated why he was an amazing choice as co-host of the show. This most likely won't be a surprise, but that just goes to show how iconic it is. Battle Kid Fortress of Peril Finale, released October 20th, 2014. Alright, let me set the stage for this real quick. So, Dan and Arin for the past 20 minutes have been playing this rage game called Battle Kid. The premise is basically that you're a Mega Man looking guy that dies in one hit, and you have to go through a gauntlet of levels that purposefully try to kill you in cheap ways with checkpoints that are spread very thinly. Arin is, of course, our player for most of the series, and Dan is cast as our supporting role. As you can expect with these kinds of games, Arin gets peeved and is desperately trying to finish levels the whole time, which he eventually overcomes. That is until Arin comes face to face with the first boss of Battle Kid, a large plant creature that shoots at you from the right hand side and shoots vines up at you from the bottom. This boss ends up being the thing that stops the series from progressing dead in its tracks, since Arin for the life of him cannot beat this boss, but of course we want to focus on Danny here. Throughout the episode, Danny kind of has to play the emotional support role of Arin, and encourage him to win, yet be realistic that they aren't going to do a 45-minute episode of Arin just fighting this one plant monster. Early in his attempts to beat the plant monster, Arin starts to tell a story and does slightly better, so Danny says that Arin should tell a story each time because it seems like a help.
I was just like watching Slackjawed in awe of you like improvising a crazy monologue while you do this shit. It seemed like it was helping actually.
The rest of the episode then continues like this. Arin fights the boss while telling an improvised story, and after he inevitably dies, Danny reacts to the story, even saying he doesn't want to interrupt him during an attempt because he doesn't want to mess him up. This all culminates in a twist ending that I'm not going to spoil here if you haven't seen it, which I highly encourage you to do so, but this episode would go on to be one of the hallmarks of not only Game Grumps, but the Let's Play community as a whole, an iconic moment that hadn't been matched since the infamous Sonic 06 speech in December of 2012. This episode was so remarkable in fact that it spawned a multi-animator project to animate the whole episode, which took 5 years and culminated to the most viewed Game Grumps video on the channel, not counting the Good Game trailer, but that probably has so many views because it was promoted. Now, I believe the reason this episode turned out to be so remarkable was in large part due to Danny. Even though the episode had Arin in the primary role, I believe that it was Danny's ability to play the role of the viewer that pushed it into being more than your standard Let's Play Rage episode. Take a look back at the Rage moments in the John era, mostly when they were both playing Sonic 06. Whenever there's a particularly hard moment, both hosts would get very excited and start yelling, getting each other pumped up or angry. This was good in the sense that it felt like you were with them and then you were getting all caught up in the moment with the guys, but there is a sense, at least to me, where I'm just like, alright, let's just calm down guys. Just when they start getting super loud and basically screaming the whole time. I mean, I'm not saying it's bad or obnoxious, it's just a bit overwhelming. Meanwhile, with Dan and Arin, it doesn't ever get too loud and over the top, because Dan brings it down a bit with his cooler personality. When Arin gets killed and starts shouting, Dan doesn't shout with him and make an explosive moment like John generally would. He just sits back and laughs at how difficult it all is. It's, at least to me, generally more funny when you have someone who's extremely pissed off yelling, and then it just goes to silence with someone laughing, than when you just have two guys getting angry at something. This brings me to my final point as to why I think Dan was an amazing choice to replace John. He's actually not so grump. I bet you all thought I just got the intro wrong when I called the John section Also Grump. You all must feel pretty silly right now, but don't worry, I'll be the better man here and let it slide. I think the dynamic between Dan and Arin is just wholly different than the vibe between John and Arin. And before the gold era grump enthusiasts jump on me, I'm not saying John is necessarily worse than Dan. I just think Dan's inclusion really kinda changed the show into something not even comparable to the old show anymore. I never got why the intro back in the John era was Arin saying, "Hey, I'm Grump," and John saying he's not so grump, when in reality, both of them are roughly the same level grumpiness wise. There were times when Arin was angry and John was more level-headed, sure, but John would get angry just as much throughout the series. Meanwhile, Dan is, in any objective measure, less of a grump than Arin. Even when he does get pissed, he's always just kinda sassy and passive-aggressive. He very rarely explodes like Arin does. Now, am I saying that the show is better solely because it adheres better to an intro that Arin came up with in 30 minutes? No, because like I just said, I don't necessarily think it's better than the John era. Did you just forget I said that 2 paragraphs ago? Come on. No, all I'm saying is that there's an interesting dynamic between Dan and Arin that wasn't present when John was a co-host. Granted, there are things that are better with John, like how John actually did know about video games, and Dan just was never really part of that scene. Though since he's been a big part of it for the last 10 years, he's probably picked up a few things. And there aren't going to be moments like in the Nickelodeon Guts episode, where John refuses to tell Arin how to play because John was able to figure it out, so he thinks Arin should have to figure it out himself as well, since Dan is just a more accommodating guy. But I think it's fair to say that he has cemented himself as the co-host of the Game Grumps in a really impactful way. Remember again that he's been on the show for more than 10 years, 10 times as long as John. So he really should be thinking of the show in the context of Terrence Howard or Edward Norton in the MCU. Sure, they did well and were big parts of their respective movies, but you aren't going to be seeing many people saying the whole reason Marvel sucks now is because Terrence Howard isn't playing War Machine anymore. But completely unrelated to Disney and Marvel, this brings us to the corporatization and expansion of the Game Grumps brand, which I'd like to coin as... During part 50 of the long-running Pokemon Fire Red Game Grumps series, released March 29, 2014, Arin poses a question to Danny regarding how long he believes the show will go on for.
You think we'll be around that long?
What, you and me?
Yeah.
Alive or doing Game Grumps?
Doing Game Grumps,
Oh, yeah.
to the point where it becomes liquid.
Yeah.
And then we're just
Yeah,
and
definitely.
we're liquid Game Grumps, and we have big billboards in fucking New Neo Tokyo.
Little did Arin know that this would be the statement that would follow the show across the next 10 years, though the point to which Game Grumps officially becomes liquid is debated among the fanbase who believes it has. Some believe it was when the Sling service was promoted so heavily via Table Flip. Others believe it was when they partnered with YouTube to create Good Game. Hell, some people thought it liquidized the second that John had left the show, but I think the Grump brand was always on its way to becoming corporate even before John was gone. Right when Arin thought up the idea to make Game Grumps a creator hub, the idea of it being a completely untainted show of 2 friends playing games together was thrown by the wayside. Keep in mind that the idea of Steam Train was in development and promoted even as John was still part of the show. Now, the process of going from what your brand originally was to the watered down concept is very long and drawn out, mind you. So this isn't one of those things where a singular event caused the Grumps brand to instantly liquidate. This gradual fading of the Grumps brand was perpetuated by a long line of decisions, ideas, and events that changed the landscape around them, some intentional and some not, I believe. I also want to point out that the idea of Game Grumps becoming more corporate doesn't necessarily correlate to their content getting worse. It just means basically what it means. That Game Grumps is now doing more things and is taking the idea of Game Grumps being a business more seriously. Many times I hear people talk about Game Grumps, and as they list off complaints, they include that they have become too corporate, which they generally say is a symptom of them being more bland and uninteresting in their commentary style. That isn't necessarily what I'm talking about here, at least not yet anyway, because Steam Train and Table Flip were by most metrics very successful additions to the Game Grumps channel. And with Game Grumps becoming more corporate, we have more organization, more events, and more Grump-affiliated projects. Remember that multi-animator project I mentioned when talking about the Battle Kids series? Well, that doesn't happen unless the Grumps are able to corporatize at least somewhat. The Animated Grump map was a collaboration between roughly 80 different animators and multiple musicians, and while organization was done in part by Ludolick and Paleoraptor, formerly KLN, something of this size being done requires the Grump business to be somewhat stable, at least more so than it was when John was a co-host. We also have the influence of Game Grumps spawning and fermenting other channels into their own during this time with Oni Plays and Super Mega, both of which have fans who swear by their content these days as being the superior version of Game Grumps. Oni Plays used the Game Grumps office from, at the latest, August of 2016 and stayed there until the channel moved to their own office in 2017 in order to become more independent. Super Mega were actually editors for the Grumps, as well as Oni Plays and Susie's KCat Gaming, who were still Grump affiliated at the time, in 2016, and uploaded their first video on their Super Mega channel in April of that same year. Super Mega didn't become fully independent until 2019, and during that whole span of time was still under the Game Grumps umbrella. While the lion's share of success of Super Mega and Oni Plays is chalked up to the hard work of those who worked on the channels and the comedic chops of the hosts, it has to be stated that if it wasn't for the Game Grumps, these channels wouldn't have started, or at least wouldn't have come to see the success that they almost immediately did. Granted, these relationships were not all puppy dogs and rainbows, especially in Oni Plays' case, and there was friction between the groups, especially when they had to share the same space. You have to acknowledge the Game Grumps' role in the creation of these channels. As the channel grew and became the steward for these equally as beloved channels, expectations for the Grumps grew in turn. No longer could they get away with loudly shouting scary no-no words at the top of their lungs for comedic effect. They had to think about the employees they housed, and they really couldn't handle a major backlash that would irreversibly destroy the channel's reputation. At the turn of 2017, the idea of cancel culture started to become more widely known, and many folks were having their careers destroyed due to controversial things they said or did in the past. No matter your opinions on cancel culture, Arin saw that this was starting to happen, and softly tried to switch his and Danny's commentary style. Gags like racist bassist and best racist jokes slowly went by the wayside and were quietly swept under the rug, as the Grumps started to call out problematic themes in the games they played, such as when they called out the transphobic moment in Leisure Suit Larry Magna Cum Laude of all things. Which I mean, what'd they expect? It's Leisure Suit Larry. We clowning this motherfucker. Take your sensitive ass back to Sakura Spirit. No, but in all honesty, I think it's fine that they decide they want to be less offensive and want to make it clear that all people are welcome, and I don't necessarily take it in as cynical of a way as most people do, where folks say they in all honesty don't care and are just trying to come across as progressive for some brownie points. Now that being said, I do think there is some truth to the idea of them trying to be less offensive to save off potential criticism, but the real question is, how are they going to distance themselves from the previously offensive things that Game Grumps did in the past? Well, the perfect scapegoat came in the form of our original Game Grumps host JonTron and his inability to think before he does things. On March 13th, 2017, after a Twitter debate with founding member of the Julumni, Destiny, JonTron joined a call with Destiny to do a live debate regarding the topic at hand, which was immigration. Simply put, John seemed to be extremely susceptible to internet propaganda and only believed the information that they put on the poll board on 4chan. It was pretty clear to Destiny and most people who watched through the whole debate that John was just completely brain-rotted on this stuff, saying that Destiny was making the point about race, then immediately saying something that, I kid you not, was like kindergarten textbook definition of racist, and then vehemently saying that he's not racist, and that Destiny was just saying his points were racist as a classic SJW move.
If they were happy with Mexico, why would they come to the United States?
Because the better handouts?
Have you ever in your entire life drove through a neighborhood where there are construction crews working or where you see people outside working? If you were to talk to anybody in manual labor, you would never hear the argument passed around that Mexicans are lazy and on welfare. They do some of the toughest jobs available in this country.
Ay, dude, you're just virtue signaling. Man, I get
How
it.
am I
Not all
virtue
Mexicans.
signaling? What are you talking about?
I'm not going to go much further than that, but really all you need to know is that the perception of JonTron was that he was basically as white nationalist and racist as you can get, which Arin was able to subtly exploit in order to distance himself from past offensiveness of the Grumps. Keep in mind that this was after the Starcade series ended, and John and Arin publicly had made up from the nastiness that was John's departure, but with John's new perception, he, and the Game Grumps as a whole, couldn't be associated with him in any way anymore. What could have been a quiet and clean breakup was made public when a fan asked if John could ever be on an episode of Guestgrumps in December of 2017. Arin and Dan both made it clear that due to John's comments, he wouldn't ever be returning on the show, even though Arin and John were on fine terms at the time when the question was asked.
It's been a long time since I've talked to John. We're not on bad terms. We're on fine terms. It's just that he lives across the country. Questionable if he'll be on the show on Guestgrumps due to recent things that have been said. I do not agree with any of those things. So I don't want to promote that idealism.
It was always kind of maybe yes, maybe no. Because of that, like, it's probably a lot closer to no. But that's not our fault. That's not our fault.
By doing this, Arin could make a statement on how different Game Grumps is now, and kind of nudge most of the edginess that was happening during that time to John's court, even though if you look at Game Grumps in 2014, it was still just as edgy without John.
Oh, giving the Asian girl math.
Yeah.
I see how it is. Well, I'm gonna pick her because she seems really smart.
Because she's good at math and she's Asian.
Now, I don't mean to come across as if I think the only reason he distanced himself was to protect his image. I think that he was probably surprised by it all. Almost like the, wait, you guys are actually racist kind of meme. But if it was all genuine, I don't think he would have as publicly and candidly said he would never be back on the show. It really seemed like things were on the upswing for them, and sure, I don't know how they felt about each other privately, but to kind of throw away that whole saga of them publicly making up so quickly, there had to be something besides his personal beliefs causing him to toss John by the wayside. This sort of shift to being more politically correct wouldn't change their content too much in my opinion. I actually prefer when the people I watch don't go out of their way to be offensive, though I will miss the days of Yi Lu and Dan getting mad at Arin's racist impression. Now, I will say that there are some times when it's particularly clear that Arin is just virtue signaling hard. Some bring up the transphobic moment from Leisure Suit Larry, but I thought that seemed mostly genuine. The moments that rubbed me the wrong way were moments like when he refused to call Chihiro he/him pronouns in Danganronpa, for example, simply because he assumed the game was being transphobic, but in reality, the point of Chihiro's character from what I can tell is that he isn't trans and still goes by he/him pronouns. Again, I could be wrong. I don't play Danganronpa or any of those kinds of games, so maybe Spooky Weeb Trash is just lying about that, but there's also a moment in the Twilight Princess playthrough, part 6 to be exact, when Dan starts talking about a moment in American Pie. Specifically, a moment where a girl has some nude video of her leaked as payback or something. I've never seen American Pie, and Arin scoffs at it saying that's gross.
When Shannon Elizabeth is getting nude, and it's going out over the internet to everyone in the school, Blink 182 is one of the groups of people that are watching it. You're like, oh man, yeah! It's really funny.
Gross.
And ridiculous. Why is that gross?
It wasn't necessarily that he said it was gross that was the issue, it was more like how he said it. He paused when Dan was explaining the scene and got quiet, almost like he was thinking about what he should say about the scene. Mind you, this was after Dan was saying how funny the movie was and how it held up really well. So he was really calling out Dan in a sort of goofy way that didn't need to be done like that.
Oh, was she like doing it on her own?
Yes. No.
So somebody was doing it without her consent.
Dan quickly saw what Arin was doing and said,
Arin, don't SJW me on fucking movies that came out 20 years ago.
To which Arin backtracked, clearly taken a little bit aback by Dan sticking up for himself. Arin just sat there and said,
Don't fucking... I just said gross. It's gross.
While Dan tries to change the subject to applesauce. Arin then starts to act a bit snippy towards Dan when he was talking about the best Zelda games, and Dan says,
You are giving me a hard time today. I'm just trying to talk about movies where people fuck pies.
Which ignites the argument again, this time taking on a more comedic tone, which culminates in Dan basically telling Arin that maybe he should actually watch the movie, instead of just assuming and criticizing it.
Do you know the movie? Do you know the scene you're talking about?
No, I don't.
Maybe watch it first.
The back half of the argument was actually really entertaining because I can see where both sides are coming from, but it was just the beginning where Arin was just like, oh, I need to call this gross so people don't think I like that sort of thing. Mind you, like I've said, I've never seen American Pie, and it honestly doesn't seem like my kind of movie, so I probably won't be watching it, so this really has nothing to do with the movie itself. It more so has to do with Arin's need to call anything out that's even remotely offensive at this time, and if Dan just backed down or didn't pick up on what Arin was doing, or even worse, actually got mad at him, then this could have been a really awkward moment. These sorts of moments have happened infrequently since 2017, and like I said, it doesn't really hinder the content much in my opinion. Some folks when talking about Game Grumps will take these moments just completely out of context, and just show them in isolation, which makes the apparent virtue signaling seem much more frequent. Those who watch these clips, however, should keep in mind that these very short moments are chunked in between hours and hours of footage, and these sessions are recorded in long form sort of way, and completely off the cuff, so it really is just a drop in the bucket when compared to the rest of their content. Irrelevant to the commentary itself, however, there's also a change in how the content was presented to the Game Grumps audience, and the type of content that was being produced. Of course, we already mentioned Steam Train, which was just the same as Game Grumps, but with Ross instead of Arin, and they played PC games instead of console stuff. Sometimes, however, they added additional Grumps like Arin and Arin's wife Susie, who I'm surprised I haven't mentioned yet. And sometimes Dan would be gone, so Steam Train had a more fluid host lineup, which could also have been a draw as well. There was also Table Flip, a series that started in February of 2014, hosted by longtime Game Grumps editor Barry Kramer and longtime Arin love interest Susie Burhow. The show itself focused on playing board games with special guests, generally others in the gaming sphere like Markiplier and Pro Jared, whose specific episodes were all removed because of something we'll mention later. Now, the gimmick of the show was that each person would dress as old-timey Western people, and there would be an old saloon aesthetic to the whole show, something that wouldn't have been feasible if it wasn't for the show being sponsored by Polaris. The show was generally very well received and seen as a great addition to the Game Grumps universe, though controversy arose when the show started to shell out a free, live TV, United States only service by the name of Sling. Starting August 8, 2015, new episodes of Table Flip would first release on the Sling TV service with a promotion uploaded on their YouTube channel stating that you could watch the episode on Sling now. Now normally, this wouldn't be a big deal if they would release the episode like the next day or even the next week on YouTube, but viewers had to wait a whole 2 months to watch an episode if they didn't want to use the Sling service, or if they were an international viewer since Sling was only available in the United States. Keep in mind, this came after getting a new episode of Table Flip pretty regularly every week, so viewers were definitely not happy. There would be nothing addressing this irritation the viewers had, besides the odd tweets saying that they had to do it since it was in their contract by Susie, but this is a really bad excuse since you were the one who signed the contract. Even if Polaris helped you make Table Flip and technically own the show, there would still have to be something in the contract that you all agreed to, saying that they could make you promote things and stipulating what that promotion would look like. It kind of shows GameGrumps' lack of experience with this kind of thing, which is fair, but even if the contract says something vague like GameGrumps was obligated to promote whatever Polaris sees fit in whatever way Polaris sees fit, I would have thought that would have put up some red flags. I'm 100% speaking nonsense here, I'm sure, because I'm definitely not a lawyer or business guy in any way, but I'm just trying to wrap my head around how they could be put up to doing something so stupid without them knowing what they would have to do beforehand. Take Rhett & Link for example. Could you ever think about them signing something that would allow a network to release Good Mythical Morning or even Mythical Kitchen on another service first, and then not release a show on YouTube, which is where their primary audience is, for months? That just seems a bit ludicrous, and I guess I get that contracts are contracts, and while you're fulfilling the request you can't be a Debbie Downer and just talk about how much it sucks, but for the response to the backlash it's something that's pretty understandable to be, well, we had to do it so it sucked, but whatever. It shows that they're not taking accountability for something that is squarely their fault. I mean, again, to bring back Rhett & Link since that was my most recent analysis, when GMM 22 was getting a lot of criticism, they squarely addressed the criticism multiple times, and then when the series still wasn't working how they wanted, they switched back and even to this day say that it didn't work. It's literally a running joke on Good Mythical Morning today to look back in horror thinking about GMM 22, with Rhett & Link being in on the joke themselves and making the lion's share of jabs at it. Compare that to the GameGrumps who, combined with how they address the John thing, literally just don't seem to care that much about criticism and never mention it. In Table Flip's case, they just ran through the remaining episodes and did what their contract wanted them to do and just never addressed it again. Moving from the controversial, we also had the advent of Grumpcade in January of 2015, which was basically a way for the Grumps to play whatever game they wanted with whoever they wanted, since Steam Train was only for computer games, and Guestgrumps tried to only have one guest at a time I believe. Anyway, not too much to say about that. It was generally a good time and had some really fun guests. Most of the time, folks who were in the Grumps office with Dan and Arin, such as Oni Plays and Super Mega. The most popular Grumpcade episode by far was actually one starring Chris, Ding Dong, and Julian of Oni Plays, where they played Simpsons Hit and Run. Which is cool to see because they've had a ton of folks on Grumpcade, some being really famous and popular, and the most successful one by a wide margin is the one where it's just another Game Grumps affiliated group and they're all making funny Simpsons noises. We also have Ghoul Grumps and Jingle Grumps that started in 2013 and have continued to this day, with a little hiccup in 2018 when Arin overbooked himself and wasn't able to do Ghoul Grumps that year. He actually made an apology video for this, which was very out of the ordinary since, as I discussed earlier, GameGrumps tends to try to just let criticism slide off and get forgotten, but for some reason it seemed that Arin was particularly upset about not doing Ghoul Grumps, most likely because it really became a staple of the channel since 2013, and was one of the first things they did to differentiate the Dan era from the John era. In his apology, Arin mentions that folks were telling him that he needs to focus on Ghoul Grumps, but he didn't listen.
People around me were sort of bringing it up, I think, and being that I'm in the position that I am, with Game Grumps, I think it was just sort of an awkward situation for people to sort of be nudging me when I clearly seemed disinterested. And it wasn't that I was disinterested in doing it, it was the last thing before I think I would have, it would have just been too much for me.
On Super Mario Party, The Rematch, Part 5, released on October 19th, 2018, Dan even mentions to Arin that they haven't recorded Ghoul Grump stuff yet.
Oh shit, we forgot to play Ghoul Grump stuff.
Yeah.
We should do that.
That's okay.
What do you mean that's okay? People are excited about it.
Yeah, well, we just don't have time.
Yes, we do. We're playing Mario Party.
What? No, we're playing Mario Party, though.
You're a funny man.
I'm just trying to cover for the fact that I completely forgot.
Yeah, I did too.
Yeah.
Some folks use this to say that Arin didn't actually care about Ghoul Grumps at all. Spooky weeb trash. And that for some reason, Arin just didn't care about it because it didn't make him enough money. Since the almighty Chris O'Neill vaguely tweeted out, heartfelt doesn't equal monetized, after Arin made his apology. This is probably the least charitable interpretation you could have of what happened. And sure, maybe this was his thought process, but let's actually think about what he says in his apology and take him at face value. Specifically, he mentions that others were telling him that he needs to do something for Ghoul Grumps, but he spaced out on it and focused on things like 10-minute power hour and live streaming. He then talks about self-care and how Ghoul Grumps became the thing that was just the one thing too much, which is an interesting point.
Dan and I talk all the time about practicing self-care and all that stuff, and sometimes it's at least easy for me to forget to do that kind of stuff. You know, as stupid as it sounds, because what's the difference? It's just us playing spooky games as opposed to the games that we usually play. But it just became the one thing. You know, it became like like one thing too much.
When talking about mental health, there's a term described as executive dysfunction, which is a little complicated, but in practice it basically means that there are times when you're given a task that you know that you have to do, but the idea of having to do it prevents you from starting the task because the idea of starting the task becomes too overwhelming. To give an example, if you're someone who struggles with something that causes you to have points of executive dysfunction, which most people do to an extent, you will see dishes in the sink and know that you need to clean them. Now normally, this isn't an issue and you clean the dishes all the time, but for some reason the idea of doing the dishes just stresses you out. You then walk away since you do dishes all the time, and you can just do them later, but something in your head just nags at you telling you you need to do the dishes, but for some reason whenever you think about doing the dishes, you just can't get yourself to get up and do it. This kind of creates a feedback loop where you can't really do anything besides think about how you need to do the dishes, which just overwhelms you to the point where you can't do the dishes, and the only way to break it is just to somehow get yourself to do the dishes, which is much easier said than done. This is kind of a simplification of course, but what I believe more than likely happened here is that Arin knew that he had to do Ghoul Grumps, but he just couldn't get himself to do it, which mind you isn't an excuse, but definitely isn't him purposefully not doing it because it isn't making him enough money. I also think that Arin convinced himself that folks don't care much about Ghoul Grumps, partially because he couldn't get himself to do it, but also because I believe that 2018 was a time when the GameGrumps viewership started to stagnate, and he thought that folks probably just wanted things that were new. I'm sure it's really easy to lose sight of the longtime fans when all you see are analytics, and when analytics aren't growing as they once were, you think that people don't like what you're doing, which a lot of the time isn't the case. If you get 1 million more people watching a year, and then 1 year it just stops, what you see in analytics is that you're growing your fanbase much less, which correlates to your fanbase not liking your stuff as much mentally. On the viewer's end, however, they still want the stuff that you are always doing. They still want Ghoul Grumps and don't necessarily need new stuff. So when Arin says that he's happy that people were talking about it and were upset that it wasn't released, I do think he genuinely means that, because it shows that people who want Ghoul Grumps are still around, and that's why he had the renewed interest to do the Nightmare Before Christmas Ghoul Grumps special in lieu of the standard Ghoul Grumps that year, and has continued to do Ghoul Grumps to this day. Now, if you want to take this all as some 4D chess move and say that he actually doesn't give a hoot and only didn't do it because it gave him less money, then why did he even make an apology in the first place? Generally, the strategy of GameGrumps has always been to not address controversy and just let it all blow over, but for some reason Arin just decided to address this? Am I to believe that the outcry for the lack of Ghoul Grumps was just so overwhelming that he had to address it, even though he didn't address the much larger outcry against the Table Flip Sling promotion, or even the full story of John leaving GameGrumps? I'd also like to ask why he then continues to do Ghoul Grumps even to this day, even though, let's be honest, Ghoul Grumps and Jingle Grumps is less popular than it's ever been. If he wanted to, he could probably softly discontinue it and do more money-making things with less outcry now, small enough to definitely be swept under the rug, that is. To think that this was all a charade and Arin only cares about making money and not the longest running series on the GameGrumps channel besides GameGrumps itself is definitely a stretch, and even though I think Chris is great, I think he was definitely way off base if he was insinuating that Arin just didn't do Ghoul Grumps purposefully since he wasn't making enough money from it. Personally, I think that it was bad he didn't do Ghoul Grumps that year, and he should have owned up to it, which he adequately did in my opinion, even doing that Nightmare Before Christmas special to make up for it that year. Something, might I add, that the Arin critics failed to bring up when mentioning this. Now, what did Arin overbook himself doing, you ask? Well, thank you for asking that 10 pages into this section about the expansion of the GameGrumps channel. The 10-minute Power Hour is a live-action series starring Dan and Arin doing random things unscripted, a la Good Mythical Morning or that one weird Smosh thing, but it's generally more chaotic and boisterous, so I would say the more apt comparison is probably bad unboxing from classic iDubbbz, except with a notable lack of racial slurs of course. When it was first released on April 3rd of 2018, it was almost immediately a success, and showed that Dan and Arin had as great of chemistry doing live action things as they did while playing games. The series became so popular that it actually spawned a whole new channel for live action content named The Grumps in 2019. Previously, there's a channel by the name of Grump Out, which hosted some live-action skits and clips from the Game Grumps channel in 2015, which was somewhat comparable, but the channel was changed into a clip channel by the name of Game Grumps Shorts in 2020, and had previously been established as the quintessential second channel where the B content goes, so they really couldn't use that one. The Grumps was meant to stand independently of Game Grumps and be the channel which expanded the Grumps brand into a multi-format empire of content, and by all accounts, the Grumps is a success, even to this day, so that proved to be a wise decision. These live-action expansions of the channel were pretty widely well received, but showed an apparent lack of interest in the main channel's content, even more so due to the Ghoul Grumps debacle. Today, these are actually the main viewership drawers of the Grumps empire, so it could be accurate to say that the Game Grumps channel is now a Let's Play spin-off channel of the Grumps, which is the main channel, but we can get into that when we get to the section where I discuss the state of the Grumps today. Now, if you thought that was it when it came to Arin and Dan's foray into live-action content, look no further than the widely acclaimed YouTube Red show Good Game. And by widely acclaimed, I mean it was about as good as any other YouTube Red shows, disregarding buddy system of course. Good Game was released in 2017, and from the get-go, you can tell that this is trying to be some sort of ironic stoner comedy thing with serialized elements. It's not super worth going into detail for each episode. You can take a look at Ellis Mark's video on the series if you want that, but the main thing I gleaned from it is how great Danny seems on camera, and how, for lack of a better word, uncomfortable Arin seems, at least when he needs to be scripted. Like I said, they're both good when they're doing 10-minute power hour, so it's possible it was just a script issue, but I almost wish the show just focused on Danny and Arin, because I just wasn't interested in any of the side characters. Like Buddy Sis, I did enjoy the first moments of the first episode, but when they started introducing other characters, I kinda just zoned out and stopped being interested. I kind of wish they had some more scenes of Dan and Arin in their daily lives on the show, but they just seemed to rush through quickly into the plot, which didn't get me very hooked. Nonetheless, it was something that happened. I think Arin and Dan were really excited, but I'm sure they saw the writing on the wall for how these shows generally tend to go. Not to say I think it was an abject failure or anything, I'm very surprised with how well the show is perceived by critics, with each episode receiving a score above 7 out of 10, which is weird because the whole show has a score of 6.6 out of 10, so that doesn't really make sense to me, but I would say that the show did pretty well. I really only watched the first episode and that Ellis Mark video, so it's very possible I don't know what I'm talking about, but overall, I think it was a good foray into live-action content and was a catalyst for more live-action things like 10-minute Power Hour and the Grumps. As the Game Grumps grew in popularity and these sorts of series and spin-offs started gaining success, it became clear that the strategy was to focus less on the show itself and explore other avenues that Dan and Arin could pursue while staying with the Grumps brand. I'd like to believe that these expansions didn't impact the Game Grumps main show too much in a way of commentary and vibe, but I'd be hard-pressed not to say that there's a fundamental difference in how the show feels since these spin-offs became the main focus. With John and Arin as well as Dan and Arin from roughly 2013 to 2017, the show's focus stayed roughly the same even though we talked about how Dan's background and personality contracted with John. Now that there are so many spin-offs, the idea of it being two friends casually playing games kind of went by the wayside, mostly because we know these guys aren't really normal guys anymore. It may be cool to see them play games with Jamie Lee Curtis and Ben Schwartz, but it presents a disconnect between the host and the audience where we, in short, no longer feel like we're sitting on a couch playing a game with them. It's more like they're playing a game and trying to be entertaining, which, in reality it always was, but it never really seemed that way. Now, if you think that feeling of them being normal people playing a game together and making you feel like you're with them going through it together is a core of Game Grumps, you can definitely say that the Game Grumps has become liquid, because we're not going to get that feeling back again. Even more so with the changes from long plays to shorter series, and how the titles are more vague in order to encourage new viewers to watch random parts, and not only appeal to those who have seen the previous parts. It's not all doom and gloom though. If you believe that the core of the show isn't that feeling of being on the couch with two random friends, and it's more about Dan and Arin's chemistry, then that's still in full swing. Contrary to what a lot of the critics feel, I do genuinely think that the Game Grumps are still funny. Sorry, Mark. And I think the chemistry between Dan and Arin is still great. You can look at the success in a way that's kind of like, look at how far these two nutballs have come, it's so cool, which is perfectly valid. I mean, that's kind of the vibe people have with folks like Markiplier, who's now doing stuff that no one would have thought possible back in 2014, so that's definitely not an unheard of concept. Now, if you go by that philosophy, then the Grumps are still going strong and their core identity is the same. Now, speaking to those of the former view, you probably don't think that the only reason Game Grumps is worse now is because their content's worse, do you? No, you don't have to be embarrassed, it's okay. There's an itching in the back of your mind saying, well, why isn't this guy talking about this one thing the Game Grumps did? Or, well, okay, their content's different, but if you only knew the true depravity of the Grumps. Don't worry, Game Grumps liquidation proponents. You've eaten your veggies, you've listened to me talk about how their content's changed for the last 10 pages. I think you've earned some. While I discussed a few controversies in the previous section, those all tied into the corporatization of Game Grumps in some way or another. The events discussed here will simply be controversies that I hear people bring up anytime you mention the Game Grumps, stuff that people use as justification for their dislike of the channel. These aren't going to be in any particular order really, but it probably makes the most sense to start with the small stuff, so let's talk about their playthrough of Sonic Adventure DX. Starting off, let me just say that Arin and Sonic have a very complicated relationship. Complicated due to the fact that he's more of a classic Sonic fan rather than a 3D Sonic fan, to put it lightly. When John and Arin were playing through Sonic 06, little did we know that Arin feels roughly the same way about every other 3D Sonic game as he does about Sonic 06, and that includes the greatest Sonic game known to mankind, Sonic Heroes mind you, so it's clear that Arin has a bit of a mental block when it comes to Sonic. The playthrough of Sonic Adventure DX was conceptualized, at least I believe, as a return to form. The first 3D Sonic game playthrough since John left, this was a time when Arin and Dan could recapture that spark that was burning during the Sonic 06 playthrough. Keep in mind this playthrough was started in July of 2015, 2 years after John had left and kept that itch for 3D Sonic roasting unscathed, so there was kind of a cliffhanger when it came to Sonic 06. They definitely couldn't just pick up where they left off without John, so they had to start their own series, this time playing the more controversial and less widely hated Sonic Adventure DX. Now here's the thing about Sonic Adventure. To the casual observer, it looks like a pretty bad and silly dumb game, just like Sonic 06, and so to someone like Arin, it can seem like just the kind of game to do one of those goofy playthroughs of, where they just make fun of the game and whatnot. But there's more to Sonic Adventure that meets the eye, and there's a lot of charm and good memories a lot of people have with that game. It was the introduction to the Sonic Adventure storyline after all, which is widely considered to be the best storyline in the whole series. Of course, Arin doesn't really see that because he's too busy just making fun of the game's graphics and saying how awfully designed all the levels are. This brings us to the walkthrough by the illustrious Leadfoot, a walkthrough that Arin and Dan followed during the Knuckles sections in order to keep from getting stuck. They had some trouble with the walkthrough throughout the whole series, but this all culminated in part 32 of their playthrough, where they as Knuckles have to find 3 emeralds in an action stage. Normally, this would be the perfect thing to use a walkthrough for. No one likes aimlessly going around an area looking for random objects, and so as the level starts, they immediately consult the walkthrough. Unfortunately, the walkthrough is very vague and says useless platitudes such as the level isn't that big so they shouldn't be too hard to find. To Arin and Dan, who had been using this walkthrough for a bit and criticizing how unhelpful it's been, this was the final straw and it seemed ludicrous they wouldn't just say where the emeralds were. This caused them to go on a 2-minute long rant, basically making fun of how bad this walkthrough was, and in the rant saying the author's name, which he did put in the walkthrough, since it was ironic that his username was Leadfoot since, as Arin puts it,
they call me the Leadfoot because my walkthroughs are like walking with lead feet.
Little did they know that the reason the author was being vague about the location of the emeralds is because the emeralds are randomly placed throughout the map, and so Leadfoot couldn't be more specific regarding where each emerald was, and could only lead players in a decent direction to find them themselves. As a now ominous portent of things to come, this rant culminates in Dan saying,
he wrote this, by the way, in 2004.
Oh, yeah?
So, if he gets a wave of hate from our fans, won't he be surprised 11 years later?
The rant was overall pretty comedic, though there were some moments of genuine exasperation in there where they went really hard on the guy. Because of this harshness, some of the Game Grumps community founded personal accounts, since he put his full name on the walkthrough, and began sending him harassing messages and death threats, I guess about how bad his walkthrough was. After Danny was made aware of this, he made a post on the GameGrumps subreddit personally apologizing for what happened, and taking full responsibility for saying his full name. GameGrumps then took down the video and re-uploaded it with Leadfoot's full name and username censored with the word pizza.
They call me the pizza because my walkthroughs are like walking with pizza.
And Danny privately apologized to Leadfoot, which Leadfoot confirmed. Leadfoot said that the harassment didn't bother him much, but was appreciative of how many folks were coming to defend him, and how the vast majority of the Game Grumps community was supportive. He then answered a couple of questions, updated his walkthrough to make it clear that the emeralds were randomized, and all was well. Now maybe this is just me being too soft on the giant corporate YouTube channel, but I honestly have no idea why this became such a big deal to people. This isn't me just saying this, mind you. This is one of the main controversies that you see come up when people talk about Game Grumps, but personally, I can totally understand why Dan said his full name. As I said before, he put his full name in the walkthrough, so I don't think what Dan did qualifies as doxing, yet folks seem to leave that part out when talking about what happened. The way he puts his name in the walkthrough also kinda leads itself to some comedy in my opinion. Of course, I'm not going to say his full name here, so I'll use a random name, but the way he writes his name is Samuel the Leadfoot Carmike, which I'm sure was intentionally silly. So as they're making fun of the walkthrough, of course they're going to be like,
You should be able to find it on your own, Aaron.
Samuel
Leadfoot
Carmike
agrees.
Like, that's just a fun thing to say. Also, like I said earlier, Leadfoot wasn't even that upset by it all. Now, obviously this would be different if Leadfoot was a guy who didn't know anything about the internet and was just randomly attacked, or if he was a small YouTuber trying to get his start and the Game Grumps community was destroying his chances at success. But Leadfoot was a guy who made a walkthrough of Sonic Adventure in 2004 and put it online. So clearly he had some understanding of how the internet was, and how people saying how bad your walkthrough was doesn't actually correlate to them coming to your house and killing your dog. He seemed like a guy who was just surprised to get all of his attention randomly when he was probably out doing other stuff. I mean, this is obviously insinuating a lot, but I'm thinking personally if I got death threats for a bad walkthrough I did of some game when I was in middle school, I would probably just think it was hilarious. There's no way I would be as traumatized or as scared as people are acting like Leadfoot was. Now, does this excuse Game Grumps from all responsibility for the event? Of course not. Dan probably should have known better, or Kevin should have known to edit that out to start with, but can we really be upset if not one person affected by this event is hurt by it? This is just like when people say a certain group of individuals should be offended by something when they're not. You're not really helping anyone, and personally, I don't think that's all that's going on here. Like I said before, when it comes to Sonic games, Arin is extremely unfair and almost immediately starts making fun of them really before giving them their fair shake. This playthrough, overall, wasn't a very good one. It was mostly just Arin saying how bad the game is and Dan nodding along agreeing, which is why I believe this was supposed to be the Dan and Arin version of the Sonic 06 playthrough. This got a lot of folks upset, but because of how, frankly, unpolished the game is, you can't really rile people in arms about the playthrough, since most people would see Sonic Adventure as some weird 3D Sonic game like 06 was. Now, because Arin and Dan were kind of just trying to make fun of the game and capture those moments of Sonic 06 rage back with John, they just put themselves in a headspace that contributed to them criticizing Leadfoot so heavily, and because of that, those who are already mad at Game Grumps for their bad playthrough of Sonic Adventure saw this as a much bigger deal than it was and got super pissed off about it. This kinda created a loop with folks who just hate Game Grumps in general, and it got to a point where no one really knew exactly what happened, but they just knew that the Game Grumps did something that was completely awful and put that in their book of grudges. In short, since Dan and Arin were wanting to be super critical towards Sonic Adventure, they were too harsh on this guy's walkthrough and said his publicly available name. Folks harassed Leadfoot because that's what happens when you do that. The people who are already mad that they were super critical towards Sonic Adventure made a big deal about this. This led to the people who wanted reasons to hate Game Grumps to share in their outrage and make it a go-to reason as to why the Grumps are evil and awful. Leadfoot didn't really care that much and never ended up marrying Michelle, which is honestly the real tragedy here. Finally, 3 years later in an episode of Skyward Sword, Dan mentions the controversy again, saying that Leadfoot didn't actually care that much and that it was pretty clear that they didn't actually dox him, which people got upset about, saying that he just invalidated his apology.
Oh, I bet I remember what it was.
Oh, yeah?
It was the one where we were, like, making fun of that walkthrough. From, like, 1992. But, like, we gave too much information, and people figured out who the guy was. And then people were saying, like, we doxed him, even though we didn't. And then he came out, and he was like, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, he's like, I don't care. I thought it was kind of cool.
Yeah. But hey, don't let that get in the way of a good lynching.
Which, I mean, he didn't really. He was just making fun of how goofy it was that happened. Like, how stupid is it that people would go out of their way to harass a guy for making a bad walkthrough of a video game from 2003? Sure, you should take responsibility for what your fans do and stuff, but I really can't blame him for thinking that whole thing was so stupid, especially since, as I've mentioned many times, Leadfoot was not hurt or impacted in any way from it. Speaking of events that could have been prevented if someone was a more intentional editor, let's talk about their weird former editor, Ben. Throughout the years, the editor of Game Grumps has always been someone who's a big part of the show. Barry, of course, comes to mind first, but there was also Kevin, who took Barry's place in 2014, Matt and Ryan, who took Kevin's place in 2016, and then Tony, who takes Ben's place after he either left or was fired from the show in 2021 due to the following events. Ben was hired in May of 2019, his first video being Zelda Twilight Princess 16 Dead Link, which you may also notice that he titles the episodes he works on very strangely, but that's a digression. Speaking on his video editing particularly though, he was always controversial, as he would sometimes do garish edits that took viewers out of the video, particularly annoyingly in long-form calmer videos like Danny's solo Let's Play of King Quest, and overall he was just seen as the worst editor GameGrumps ever had. This isn't the reason I'd like to bring him up though. I mean, if being a bad editor constituted as controversial, then 2016 to 2018 me sure has some explaining to do. What was peculiar was that during his tenure as GameGrumps editor, viewers started to notice some things that were a bit untoward about the sort of things he edits into his videos. Nothing too weird, just some off-color sexual jokes and whatnot from time to time, but it seemed when looking through his social media, these things were not out of the ordinary for him. Particularly, he would make various comments directed at singer and social media personality Jacob Sartorius from 2017 to 2019, who was 15 at the first occurrence of interaction, and 17 at the most suspect interaction where he would bring up requesting nudes from Jacob and posting them on his timeline. It would be one thing if he was just quote tweeting Jacob and saying dumb things, but after that tweet was brought to light, every other interaction was recontextualized in a different, possibly more sinister light. Of course, folks were concerned about this, and of course, it didn't help that they thought Ben's editing was awful as well, so they wanted him off the show and started to try and make Arin aware of the situation. A few weeks after the majority of this stuff came to light, Arin would make a statement on Twitter on July 4th of 2020, stating that they talked to Ben and made it clear that those jokes were not acceptable, also stating that he took a while to respond because he wanted to give Ben time to grieve a dead family member. He also stated that he was certain that these tweets were only very bad jokes and that there was no indication that he would ever do anything predatory. On July 6th, Ben would post his own extremely detailed apology to the GameGrumps subreddit. In short, he took responsibility for making the tweets, but re-emphasized that they were simply jokes, and that his Twitter handle, Penis Bailey, was a reference to his rap group persona where he was an outrageous and out there edgy guy. He also said that the interactions with Jacob were simply because he thought that the Vine star was very funny in an ironic way, and the only reason he would respond to him was because he thought his followers would think it was funny. This all culminated in him saying that the reason Arin took so long to respond was because he was giving Ben space since his mother died, and that his initial lackluster responses dismissing the controversy were due to his mental state at the time. Those who were just genuinely concerned with the jokes he would make seemed to take this apology in good faith. Not to say that they all did though, since I still feel very weird about those sorts of jokes, and I don't know why he didn't just think about how weird it would look to ask a 17-year-old to post nudes on his timeline before he said it, since he was clearly an adult at the time. But those who propagated the controversy in the first place were definitely not happy with it. These folks only wanted one thing. They wanted Ben to no longer work on the show and for him to be completely excommunicated from the Grumpverse. Now, I'd like to go into another controversy for a second that may help us understand why Arin may have been hesitant to immediately get rid of Ben. In May of 2019, a Twitter user by the name of Chai accused a longtime video game reviewer commentary guy Pro Jared of doing sexual stuff with him when he was only 16. This included trading nude photographs of each other, talking about sexual fantasies, etc. I'm not going to get into this because not a lot of it's related to the Game Grumps, but one thing of note is that the very first people Chai sent these accusations to were the Game Grumps. This caused the Grumps to private every video they did with Pro Jared and completely distance themselves privately, thinking that all this information was going to go public and wanting to get ahead of the controversy, I'm sure, not contacting Pro Jared or anyone before going scorched earth. Well, as it turns out, Chai was suffering from psychosis during the time, and there wasn't much evidence that they interacted in the way that Chai was claiming. After Pro Jared released his video responding to the accusations and pretty handedly debunking them, public opinion switched around and the idea of Pro Jared having done anything wrong is a lot more controversial than it was in the beginning. While the Grumps never publicly commented on the Pro Jared situation and still have the videos they did with him privated, it was clear that being so quick to distance themselves burned them a little, and they should have waited for more information before jumping the gun like that. Now, why I bring this up is because with this context, it makes a little more sense why the Grumps would be more hesitant to fire Ben after being made aware of his previous tweets. While it's more cut and dry than the Pro Jared situation, it was clear that Ben made those tweets and it was clear they were questionable, quickly distancing themselves and sweeping everything under the rug would have been very suspicious, much like it was with the Pro Jared situation. You also don't want to have the reputation of someone who quickly distances themselves every time something controversial happens with someone who's associated with you. Not long after the Pro Jared situation and before the Ben situation, they would have to distance themselves from both Schmorky and Crikey Dave due to controversies as well. So that being said, it was also possible they just didn't see the Ben thing as that big of a deal after those three much more major controversies. Eventually, Ben would either leave or be fired in 2021 and be replaced by the much more anonymous editor Tony. It's clear that the Game Grumps editors today would much rather remain anonymous after the controversy surrounding Ben, and so the fellas very rarely mention them, even joking that they don't even know the editors' names anymore, and calling them Ed Itor.
I'm sure they're lovely.
They're great. They're great. Isn't that right, editor?
Isn't that right, Ed? Itter.
Because of this transition, personality behind the editing is much less apparent, and things are simply edited in such a way that's acceptable. So gone are the days of Bergie and Wolfjob being editing jokes, but I guess no one else is getting seizures from Ben flashing things on the screen, so that's a plus. Speaking of violently spasming uncontrollably, let's talk about Dan's history with women for a bit. So, on March 21st of 2021, a fellow by the name of Donnie posted some accusations about Dan, linking a Reddit post showing the following. A text from Dan to the poster where they talk about how he was going to do a show somewhere in September of 2013, a text to this person in October of 2013 wishing her a happy 18th birthday, not necessarily from Dan, and finally, a video from Dan where he talks about how he wants to have sex with her in a jacuzzi in 2017.
So I just got to my room at the resort in Mexico. Girl, look at this jacuzzi tub. Oh, it's got water jets that shoot out of the seats. They got fucking seats. Oh man, 2 seats in fact. Wish you were here to take up that other one and then crawl onto the first one so we could fuck in this. Anyway.
The poster then states that after doing sexual stuff backstage at a Game Grumps live event, all contact from Dan ceased. Because of this evidence, Donnie concluded that Dan was a creep and a groomer and all the nutty stuff we see all the time. You probably don't need me to tell you that these accusations are tenuous at best, but taking a look at the first message, it really does just look like Dan is promoting his band to a fan who messaged him. They don't even say anything really personable. It looks like it starts off with the fan saying how great the show was, and Dan responds by saying, "Thanks, you rock." She then seems to say that he should do a show where she is, and Dan says, "Yeah, I was thinking about it, I'll keep you posted." Like, this first set of messages seems like a completely normal fan and performer interaction. Also, keep in mind that she was 17 and 11 months old when this interaction occurred, so even if they did continue talking, we can't seriously call this grooming. Then we get to the hot tub thing, which takes place when she's 22, and we get an explicitly sexual reference. She also says that they did sexy stuff backstage once when she was already of age. To me, and I hate to be this guy, but you can't deny the strangeness of this whole interaction, in that it seems like she was just upset that he ghosted her after they had sex, and then went back to find something incriminating about him. Then she realized her first interaction with him was when she was technically, by the most technical and specific terms, still a minor, which by all accounts was an extremely average and normal interaction. Because of how inconclusive this evidence was, Donnie rescinded their accusation and apologized for propagating this, stating that they didn't intend the thread to get so out of hand. Which is kinda dumb because in the original tweet, it very much seemed like they always hated the Game Grumps and wanted to take them down, with random interludes saying how they always hated the Grumps and never liked Arin. So it was clear Donnie wanted this to get attention. Dan also released a statement from the Game Grumps PR team saying that he never did anything that was illegal, and though he had made mistakes in the past, he never did anything ill-intentioned or exploitative. This was not the first time accusations regarding sexual activity surfaced about Dan, however. In November of 2019, Dan's previous personal assistant, Katie, released a play by the name of Bad People that details her experience with sexism, harassment, and the overall Me Too movement stuff. A character in the play that Katie describes as being manipulative and overall a womanizing creep seems to have many similarities with our co-host. Soon afterwards, many other women came forward and told similar stories, though it is important to note that very few of these accusers provided any corroborating evidence. The accusations include situations where Dan would sleep with women much younger than him, though of course not underage, manipulate them into thinking that they had a chance at a larger relationship with him, date bisexual women in hopes that they would have threesomes with him, and just overall abuse a power dynamic that came with him being a popular and influential guy. Katie has since come forward after these connections were drawn and say that John was based on Dan and her experiences with him. So, considering the overwhelming amount of sources that came forward with these accusations, I think it's safe to say that Dan was acting extremely scummy towards his fans after he began to get more popular. Though it isn't surprising, his stage name is Danny Sexbang after all, it doesn't excuse this behavior. That being said, it's not like he was doing this with anyone underage, and there wasn't any sort of abuse going on besides the obvious power dynamic between a fan and their idol, so it isn't anything that he should really be cancelled for. I don't think he's a dangerous person from these accusations, and he isn't a danger to anyone who wouldn't know any better, though there is an argument to be made that he specifically goes after more vulnerable people, but that I think would take more evidence to back up than we have. So I don't think that it would make sense to take away his platform or anything like that, which is the goal of canceling people in the first place, to take people away from their platform which they can use to hurt others. I just think that anyone who thinks they want to be in a relationship with Dan should be made aware of the stuff that he does, and take that into account, which I think making these issues public did, so I guess mission accomplished. Good job, everyone. Overall, I don't really think there need to be a statement from Dan regarding this stuff, besides those grooming allegations earlier. It's sad that the tenuousness of those allegations, which were the more sensationalized ones, kind of poisoned the well for all this. I think that Dan being a womanizing person who just uses women for sex is something that people should be made aware of, in case they're talking to Dan in that way. But since those other allegations were so stupid, it made everyone doubt these other, more credible ones. Like I said though, the goal should have been just to make people aware of this, and anyone who casually looks into this will see all this come up. So I believe this was a pretty good conclusion to the controversy. Finally, I'd like to bring up one more controversy, but this one's a little different because the folks involved really don't like this controversy being talked about. I went back and forth on if I should even bring this up, but it kind of is one of the biggest things that have happened to the Game Grumps recently, and I'm certain that most people will know who I'm talking about when I start going into this, so if you do, I just want to say that the folks who are involved in this want nothing to do with this controversy, so if you for some reason want to message them or even be nice to them about it, don't. I also may delete comments if they mention specifically who is involved in this, which I've never done before, but I just want to make sure this isn't a video that perpetuates something the folks involved don't want. And probably by talking about this for so long, I'm just making this worse, so. Dream Daddy was the first of now 3 games produced by Game Grumps, starting development around October of 2016 and first teased in June of 2017. The game is a dating sim which follows Ju, a single father, who moves to a new town and finds that his new dwellings are filled to the brim with single and dateable dads. To court these dads, you have to complete minigames and go through their intense backstories. Only then will you achieve one of the game's 11 different endings. The game was released in July of 2017 to pretty good reviews, folks generally praising the game's writing and handling of serious subject matter while retaining a comedic tone. However, you will see the odd review from time to time saying that the game panders to the LGBT community and mentioning the Game Grumps killing certain friendships. After the game was first teased, a prominent member of a now competing Let's Play channel talked about it on a stream on June 27, 2017. This individual, who I will refer to as Doug, worked in the Game Grumps office during the game's development and therefore had intimate knowledge of the vibe and production of the game, though he didn't work on the game himself. Now Doug, who is a member of the LGBT community, criticized the game, saying the game was created specifically to pander to a sort of Tumblr audience, and not genuinely be supportive of the community. He also criticized the fact that no one who worked on the game was gay, though Arin would come out sometime later and confirm that he is bisexual.
Let the other person text your mom or dad on your phone something embarrassing.
Okay, text
Really?
my mom.
What's the last thing she texted
The last thing we were talking about was being bisexual.
Oh.
And that the game simply was a way to put themselves on a pedestal for making a gay dating sim. On July 14th, 2017, Doug's boyfriend, who I refer to as Frothy Orange Vanilla Drink, or FOVD for short, made a post on his Tumblr echoing Doug's sentiments since they both worked together in the Game Grumps office and saw the same things. Shortly after FOVD's post, Brian would post a series of tweets telling folks not to be so hard on the Dream Daddy team, and that there was a ton of work and passion being put into the project. In a reply to this thread, Swizzly Bubbles would state that Doug and FOVD were beta testers on the project and worked closely with the development team, and therefore would know what they're talking about, assuming Brian's tweet was in reference to Doug and FOVD's statements. Susie would then step in and make it clear that Doug and FOVD had nothing to do with the game and didn't do any work or beta testing on it whatsoever. This sentiment was echoed in a comment on a documentary video regarding the development of the game by the director of the game, Tyler Hutchinson, where he states that he doesn't know why they're acting as authorities on the project, considering they never seemed at all interested in it, and talked to Tyler less than 10 times throughout his time at Game Grumps, so little in fact that Tyler didn't even know they were game developers themselves. He also adds that his team was working 16-hour days while this was all going on, and he doesn't think he could ever shit on a game dev team while they were in full crunch like that. Doug would later clarify that what he said on the stream was actually the culmination of a great deal of complaints he heard from folks working on the game. Folks who wanted to say something but were way too afraid of how it would affect their careers. These folks would egg Doug on and want him to talk about their gripes so badly that some even sent him specific complaints listed in email form, so much so that at times on the stream he was literally reading off a script that was sent to him. He was even sent a build of the game along with the sender's criticisms, so Doug could adequately look into them. Doug's boyfriend also encouraged this as well, and so he and Fobs really felt that it was the right thing to do, and that they were standing up for these people who wanted to say something about how exploitative the game was, but couldn't for fear of career repercussions. Unfortunately, immediately after Doug went public with the criticisms, everyone backpedaled and denied any involvement or any of their criticisms of the game, going even beyond the virtual realm, where folks in the GameGrumps offices would be needlessly antagonistic towards them, and just overall act very strangely when they were around. More unfortunately, this would go beyond simply having an unpopular opinion on a video game. After Brian and Susie tweeted out their shrouded responses to Doug and Fob's critiques, GameGrumps fans began harassing Doug, believing he was just making everything up and lying about knowing anything about the game. This culminated in his phone number and docs being released in a 4chan thread by someone who Doug and Fobs say was someone they personally knew from the GameGrumps office, but they declined to give specifics. After this docs was released, Doug's mother was contacted and he was outed as being gay to his family, something his family vehemently disapproved of, causing them to excommunicate him. This caused Doug to spiral into a depression that culminated in a suicide attempt that was stopped by his boyfriend. Even more disturbingly, when he went back to the Grumps office and discussed his suicide attempt with a coworker, they brought up the hypothetical of someone killing themselves and leaving a note blaming Arin and Susie, fantasizing how they would really stick it to the Game Grumps. All of this was covered up intensely by the Game Grumps, who actively tried to make it difficult for Doug and Fob to leave, worried that what happened would become more public if they weren't able to keep a close eye on the duo, and doing things like withholding payments for work for several months. Doug and Fob came forward with their experiences in full during a live stream on December 22nd, 2022, after they had left the abusive environment and had been doing their own work for a while. During this stream, Matt Watson of Super Mega donated 150 subs, which Doug was extremely confused by, considering he hadn't talked with Matt in a long while. Doug then goes on to say that this is clearly Matt putting on a show and acting like they're still good friends and on good terms, when in reality, they're not. After this apparently dubious display of goodwill, Doug goes on to reveal that it was none other than Matt Watson who sent him the beta copy in the first place. 9 days after Doug and Fob's tell-all stream, Matt confirms that it was indeed him who sent Doug the copy of the game in a reply to a Reddit post. He also states that he almost immediately regretted doing it since he was afraid of being fired from his job, and came forward to Arin since he believed that it was a shitty thing to do. He goes on to dispute Doug's narrative that he was being disingenuous with donations, and states that he does fully support them, and things have been smooth with them for a while. Finally, he says that the stream itself kind of threw him for a loop because he didn't realize what was happening, and he says that he hopes that Doug feels more at peace after getting this out in the open. Now, of course, if we want to take what Doug says at face value, this seems par for the course for Matt, and this apparent goodwill is not as accurate as he claimed. If you want a bit of levity during this, though, Doug also states that second co-host of Super Mega, Ryan, reached out to him and was really straightforward with Doug, saying that he can't support him because he'll lose his job, so at least someone didn't try and play mind games with him. There are some details I'm leaving out as respect to Doug and Fob, but overall, they want to state that there are no good guys in this situation. This isn't some standard, oh, Game Grumps is bad situation. This is the industry and everyone involved really screwed us over type of thing. Things went so high up that now there are blacklists against them in the gaming industry, which has made it hard for them to get work. They also state that folks try to make this into some sort of juicy drama to use ammunition against a particular side, which we can infer is the Game Grumps side, when this is not a situation where sides can clearly be drawn like that. So this is going to be a really difficult task, but let's try and actually take the facts of what happened and remove things that don't really involve the Game Grumps. For example, can we blame them for the community harassment and doxing which leads to Doug's suicide attempt? Doug says that there's only one person who would have leaked his phone number and doxed him, and we can assume that it would be someone who would be upset with the Dream Daddy thing, so most likely someone from the Game Grumps office. Okay, so we can give him that, but Doug doesn't want to reveal anything specific, which of course is his right to do. In that case, we can't be like, oh, it was Arin or Brian who doxed him, it was their fault. Doug was fine with calling out Matt, possibly because he thought he was trying to save face, but it also makes me think that if there was a great deal of involvement with the people we consider the Game Grumps, Doug would have mentioned them. Speaking of Arin, Doug actually says that Arin wasn't one of the real bad guys, and was the one who gave him the couch that Doug slept on when they didn't have any money for a bed. It was seen as sort of a platitude, like Doug really wasn't that thankful. He said it as if it was the least Arin could have done, but still it confirms in a way that this really didn't have Arin busting down Doug and Fob's door and yelling at them like some folks make it seem. Throughout the whole stream, Doug and Fob kind of make it a show about how they're not going to name names or reveal identities because they don't want to be that petty, and they make fun of the whole drama scene and how people want to know what happened, so they purposefully don't reveal specific information about a lot of stuff, which again is their right, but Again, that makes it so we actually only get a small amount of information, which like I said is intentional on Doug and Fav's part. The only things we can say for sure are that Doug was sent a copy of Dream Daddy from Matt before it was released, and that they were not involved in any sort of development or testing in the game. We also know that Doug and Fav had criticisms of the game, and that they were at the Game Grumps office when development of the game was occurring. Finally, we can probably take it as a given that Doug wouldn't lie about being doxxed and trying to commit suicide. If you strip away all the doomer stuff he talks about with politics and the internet and gaming culture in general, which is understandable because he's had a really rough go the past couple years, those are the only things that he really tangibly says. Keep in mind that Doug also says that the narrative has always been ludicrously incorrect, and that another reason he doesn't want people to go sleuthing for things is that he knows that they are going to attack the wrong people. Which is funny because he also sort of insists that everyone is awful and evil in the Let's Play industry, so I don't really know how folks could attack the wrong people, but I digress. So the people in your heads like Arin, Susie, etc. are most likely not the folks Doug is talking about. Now here's the thing that really sucks about this though. Since Doug wants to frankly be a little self-righteous and not say anything and just act like everyone on the internet is a bunch of peons, we don't know what he specifically thinks the narrative is, and so we don't know if our narratives and his narratives line up. All he says is that everyone who's looking into this is wrong. No, I'll not be correcting you, just know that everyone is bad and I'm not going to say anything specific or name names besides Matt who made himself known in this stream. Am I upset at Doug for this? Well, I would be, if he was actually trying to set anything straight in this stream. It's clear to me that this stream was literally a stream, pun intended, of consciousness. Just like him venting about everything. He doesn't need to prove things to people. Like he says he doesn't want anyone to attack anyone over this, because he says that there'll never be true justice. He just wants to vent about how awful everything was and is, and he doesn't want to be a public guy anymore. He just wants to make games. The problem with that, you all may be thinking, is why is he saying all this on stream if he doesn't want to be a public guy? Well, as Doug says on his stream, he always feels guilty about things and blames himself for everything. This could be hard to glean from the vent stream, but I could see Doug feeling like he owes folks who know about him an explanation about what's going on, even though he doesn't really want to stream about it and believes it won't help at all. He seems to be, at this time, trapped between this ideal where all he does is make video games that have no name attached to them, and the reality where he and his boyfriend are public figures to an extent because of their time on that Let's Play channel, and so that influences what folks know them for. That is all to say that I don't think we can take everything that's said here at face value. Doug doesn't want anyone to act on it and actively says that his audiences don't know how to think for themselves, so I think that he isn't taking careful consideration to make sure everything he's saying is accurate. Was his experience at Game Grumps bad? I'm certain that it was, and I'm certain that there are plenty of individuals who are awful to him that gave him good reason to think all these things, but taking this as a smoking gun or something against the Grumps is silly, because unless Doug actually wants to go through everything and not just say he has evidence, but actually show evidence, which he won't because he doesn't care, we can only take this as someone who is really screwed over not just by Game Grumps, but apparently everyone around him besides a very tiny number of people, ranting about how awful everything is and how he wishes he could just make games without having to be dragged into all this. Folks may say that this is invalidating his experience, but here's the thing. I don't know Doug. I don't know Favs, I don't know Arin, Susie, or Brian, and from what Doug says, everyone is lying about everything all the time, so why in the world would I just take Doug at face value? The whole point of his stream, overall, seems to be that everyone on the internet is awful and fake and lying and pushing narratives, so I don't know why folks when they hear this just take Doug as obviously being the only one who's truthful, because he says he's the truthful one, right? He says that other people are lying, so we have to take that as him being truthful because someone on the internet wouldn't lie, right? Look, I'm definitely not saying he's lying, but you can't go watch a stream where someone says that everyone is being disingenuous and lying and just assume that this guy is being entirely truthful. Like Doug said, there are no good guys in this situation. If we're going to be paranoid about everything, let's be paranoid about everything. In actuality, that's not how things tend to work. Sometimes it is. In many situations it is, where things are just really, really bad, and maybe I'm very naive, but I tend to not believe someone when they say that everyone is lying about everything and they're the only ones who are telling the truth. Here's what I think most likely happened. Though, as Doug says, this is most likely false, but I like to cap these off with a fun narrative. So, Doug is working in the Game Grumps office while they're making Dream Daddy. Co-workers and people working on the game complain about it, and they say how they think it's a tumblery and pandering sort of thing. Favd wants Doug to talk about it a bit, but Doug doesn't really think it's worth the trouble. This part is confirmed in his stream. But the folks who work on the game encourage him to speak out. This gained even more legitimacy when Matt Watson of Super Mega, someone in a very similar position to Doug, says that he will support him if he publishes the criticisms, but states that it makes the most sense for Doug to be the one to publish them since he actually is gay, and so his critiques will have more punch. Matt was also actually given the beta copy for the game, and so he sends it over to Doug in order to let him try it out and iron out his thoughts. Doug decides he'll do it since it seems like he has a ton of support, and so he plays the game a bit and then formulates his critiques, even getting specific criticisms from people who said that they would speak out against it, and merging those in with his own thoughts. Finally, Doug goes public and speaks about it on a stream on June 27, 2017, his boyfriend also making a Tumblr post regarding it later on July 13, 2017. The same day, after noticing some backlash towards the developers, assumedly because of the stream and the post, Brian tweets out saying not to be hard on the developers and ensuring everyone that the team is very passionate about the game, and it's insulting to insinuate that they are just trying to make a cash grab. Someone by the name of Swizzly Bubbles then replies saying that Doug and Favd made it clear the devs were good dudes, and states that they were beta testers and worked closely with the dev team, so they would know what they were talking about. Susie sees this and is confused since Doug and Favd literally had nothing to do with the development of the game and corrects the commenter. GameGrumps fans see this and believe that Doug and Favd were simply lying about seeing the game and go on a harassment campaign against them, particularly Doug. Meanwhile at the office, everyone backed down and no one who said they would back Doug up does, not even Matt, who is a very prominent reason he went public in the first place. The narrative becomes that Doug and Favd completely lied about a game they had no involvement in just because they didn't like it. This leads to members in the development team who didn't know about the criticisms of their peers to see them in a really bad light and start treating them weird, particularly Tyler Hutchinson, who saw them as just kicking devs as they were trying to crunch out a game. Since no one in the office would confirm that they had qualms with the game, and Doug didn't want to show evidence or name names of what happened, the overall view of them among the team was very negative. Someone who Doug was in contact with took this too far when he released his docs, causing him to be outed and subsequently excommunicated from his family, which leads to his suicide attempt. After this happens, he talks to someone he believes would side with him, since he disliked the Game Grumps and Dream Daddy as much as Doug and Favd did, but to his shock, instead of showing empathy, the person started talking about how crazy it would be if Doug did kill himself and blame Arin and Susie, fantasizing about how much they would hurt their brand. The situation that happened then became known, and somehow it gets to Matt, who feels awful since he lost his friend to suicide back in the day.
I have no recollection of ever opening up to Lex about my friend's suicide, and if I ever did open up to her about it, I know that I would never have referred to him in the manner that she portrayed.
He doesn't know what to do, but goes to Arin to confess that he was the one who sent Doug the beta copy of the game, which disputes the narrative that Doug and Favd would know nothing about the game. Arin decides not to go public with this since the game was getting close to release, and he doesn't want any more drama attached to it. Since something objectively horrible happened to Doug that was based on a miscommunication, he doesn't want Doug and Favd just leaving and telling everyone what happened. The Game Grumps office then started to try various shenanigans to keep Doug and Favd from leaving LA, so they could keep a closer eye on them. There were even folks who were on their streams to check what they were saying. However, what they would actually do if Doug or Favd said anything is unknown, since I don't believe any paperwork was involved. Doug and Favd are finally able to leave LA after dealing with a great deal of shenanigans and nuttiness for a long time, but continue to stream from time to time, though completely unaffiliated with the Let's Play channel anymore. Folks keep coming by and asking about the Dream Daddy stuff as well as other drama regarding Game Grumps, and it gets to the point where they feel like they cannot get away from it as hard as they try, with folks from Game Grumps still contacting them in a way that they believe is disingenuous to patch things up, in hopes that their contributions to their awful experience in LA do not get revealed. One of the main perpetrators of this is Matt of Super Mega, who apologized to them privately for what he did and donates to their streams from time to time as a way to publicly show that they're still friends. All of this starts to become too much to bear, so on December 22nd, 2022, he starts a stream and begins to vent about all the issues he's been dealing with, where he shares the majority of the information we have today. During the stream, Matt donates 150 subs, which Doug calls out later in the stream, saying that Matt absolutely does not talk to them anymore, and states that the donation was just to protect himself. 8 days later, Matt replies to a post on the Super Mega subreddit calling out how disingenuous he is from what Doug said on stream. Matt disputes Doug's claim and says that they're friends and things have been smooth for a while, and vehemently denies that his donations were him buying silence. He admits to sending Doug the beta copy of the Dream Daddy game, and says that he was a much more bitter person in his early 20s, possibly explaining why he had all those criticisms of the game that he never made public. He finally says that the whole stream threw him for a loop, since he didn't think that Doug felt that way at all, but wishes that Doug found some peace getting all his gripes out. Then in January of 2023, Blowbox made a really bad video on the controversy. So overall, this is one of those things that we're still at a standstill with. No parties involved want to be involved anymore and actively discourage anyone trying to find any information on this, which is why I'm using dumb fake names for those involved, but what we can say is that some bad stuff happened to them while they worked at the Game Grumps, but can we even be certain to what extent if they don't want to be specific? This is kind of similar to the walkthrough controversy I talked about way back in the beginning of this section, but in a different sort of light. whereas Leadfoot didn't think it was a big deal. Doug and Fobbed actively just hate internet people and don't want them to screw anything up anymore. What I can say with certainty is that the narrative of this being a, oh, Game Grumps is awful sort of thing is not accurate. This is more of a, oh, the internet and public influences in general are awful. Some look at this and are like, yeah, but I bet this person was a good guy and these people did this stuff. When the reality, if you take Doug at face value, is its plainest day. There were no good guys. This kind of goes for most Game Grumps controversies, the majority of which I didn't talk about here because they either don't really involve the Game Grumps or are just propagated by folks who just really want to get mad at the Game Grumps for some reason. Since the Grumps don't respond often to controversies, we don't get any other sides of these stories as well. And so I frankly don't want to just regurgitate Kiwi Farms threads about how Susie is a dumb cringe lord who Arin is stupid for loving. I would say if we can take a lesson from these, it would be that the Grumps are generally really bad at responding to any sort of controversy, and they come at it in a way that assumes all controversies are kinda stupid, which isn't entirely accurate. I would also say that the main problem comes from the Game Grumps fanbase, which is known as being a particularly ravenous fanbase, and not necessarily from the Grumps themselves. Opposing that force, however, is an equally as ravenous and insane fanbase of people who hate Game Grumps, which has spawned way back after John left the Grumps. So when you have two equally passionate and insane sides constantly fighting, it really probably is for the best that you don't really mention the stuff that's going on. Game Grumps, and especially Arin, is in a very precarious position where he's constantly vehemently defended and vehemently hated, so literally anything he says that can be perceived as somewhat controversial gets analyzed to hell, where it barely even matches what the original statement was. Take his goofy comments about American Pie for instance. The haters took it as him immediately virtue signaling and trying to make himself seem better than Danny, and the defenders took it as him standing up against sexism and finally calling out that movie. When in reality, when you watch it in context, Arin just says something and Dan argues with him about it in a sort of joking way, which was frankly pretty entertaining to me. And this, after 51 pages and 29,109 words, brings me to my final point about the entirety of this YouTube channel. Let me pull back the curtain a little bit and tell you how I tend to make these kinds of videos. I always come at them, in the beginning, with a premise, but that premise starts to change as I begin researching more things as I write the script. Now the original idea was I was going to go through the history of the Grumps, try and talk about specific series and ideas, and finally talk about what could have gone wrong. Initially, this section was going to be called The State of the Grumps, or something like that, and I would talk about how they fell off, but end on a hopeful little positive interlude about maybe a random good video that could be a slight portent of some improvement, but just as a way to end on a positive note. Then I started watching the early episodes, and especially with the John ones I hate to say, but the general vibe was, oh, I remember thinking these were more funny back in the day. I probably just grew out of them a bit. I then continued on with the Dan era stuff, which I start to like a bit more. I start to like them even more as I went on. I watched some of the Ben editing videos as I went on to write that section of the controversy part, and loved the King's Quest video with Dan solo. I started getting recommended more animations and Game Grumps moments, and enjoyed those, especially when Dan had the dream about fish stealing things and remarks that he's glad that fish don't steal money. I then watched their episode on YouTube Playables released in December of 2024, and I really enjoyed that as well. Then it dawned on me. I hadn't watched Game Grumps in a really long time. I had only watched the videos critiquing Game Grumps and talking about Game Grumps controversies. Because of that, I thought they were really awful and unfunny and just extremely conceited and cringy. I simply assumed that the Game Grumps weren't funny, at least not anymore. I have to tell you though, that fish story was pretty dang funny.
And I got almost 1 million points.
Thank God fish aren't into cash.
Like they're stealing my cash?
Yeah, well, I fell asleep for a second there. I had like a 2-second dream that like fish were stealing stuff. And then when I woke up, I was like, man, could you imagine if like they didn't just want your valuables, they wanted cash? And then I said it out loud and I was like, I dreamed that.
What I'm trying to say is that it's really easy to get lost in the controversies and theories about the goings-ons behind the scenes in the Game Grumps office. And some things are genuinely concerning, but that doesn't really affect their content. Whenever I watch those drama videos on the Game Grumps, they always sprinkle in little criticisms like it seems like Dan is phoning it in, and that they seem like they don't like each other anymore, which affects their commentary, in between talking about the latest mean thing Susie said, or dumb thing that Arin was offended by, of course. Clearly, this is all just subjective and people can feel whatever they want about their content, but I really didn't feel that way at all. They still seem to enjoy doing the show, they still have a great chemistry with each other, and they'll still provide all the wacky hijinks they used to. Now some may say, well, it's clear they aren't as popular as they used to be, so they had to have fallen off, which you're completely right about, though I believe this has more to do with how monstrously popular they used to be, and less to do with a dramatic fall off in quality. Folks will take a cursory glance at the GameGrumps channel and say, whoa, they have 5 million subscribers. Shouldn't they generally be getting at least 1 million views an episode? What a dead channel. When that's a bit unfair of a thing to say, considering they upload every single day, and 9 times out of 10 it's an episode of a series, which is always going to start strong and slowly drop off in viewers as the series goes on. We see the same thing with Oni Plays if we compare channels, and though Oni Plays gets a relatively similar number of views despite having 1/5 of the subscribers, I believe that can be chalked up to Oni Plays being particularly relevant these days, with mainstays like Zach and Tomar getting a lot more attention in recent years. Let's assume they have fallen off though, since these metrics are so subjective. And let's say the GameGrumps channel is a lot less popular than it should be considering its size. Well, you absolutely can't say the same thing about the Grumps channel, which consistently gets 500-600k an episode despite only having 1.17 million subscribers. If the problem was that Arin and Dan just suck now and are phoning it in, clearly just trying to cling to some relevancy desperately, why in the world are the live action videos where they do random unscripted stuff so popular? That's another thing I'd like to add. This is not a video on the Grumps channel, but whenever I see this brought up by the GameGrumps ranters, they always talk about how this is just a desperate offshoot by the Grumps, as if it isn't relevant, or something that isn't even paid attention to, when that is absolutely not the case. It seems to me that once the Let's Play channel started to stagnate a bit, they tried their hand at making live action stuff and really enjoyed it, as well as how popular it got, and so they just added that to their repertoire. They still do the GameGrumps thing just as much. Of course, they're only uploading once a day instead of 3 or 4 a day like it was back in the early Dan and John era, but that could just be because of the workload or simply because they only used to be roughly 10 minutes long. And in my opinion, it hits the same comedic spots as it always has. In fact, I would say that it's gotten better in a lot of ways. I enjoy episodes being 30 to 40 minutes nowadays, I enjoy the current editors, and I enjoy the format of the show is back to being just the GameGrumps and less random spin-offs like Steam Train and Table Flip. Since 10 Minute Power Hour and all the live action stuff is on its own channel, this is really the first time since the John era GameGrumps has just been the GameGrumps. After the last of the bigger names of the show left to do their own stuff like Ross and Barry, and of course Super Mega and Oni Plays are completely independent now, the GameGrumps show was stripped to its bare bones. Back a few years ago they would try to mess with the format and do different things, but I definitely think it works best when it's simply Arin and Dan playing games with each other. Of course, I do love the Dan long plays of his story-based point-and-click adventure games, so those should definitely make a comeback as well, but the show itself should probably stay a simple one. Now, if you believe that the controversies and drama is bad enough that it keeps you away from the show, then that's totally fine. Clearly there's some wacky stuff that has gone on behind the scenes in the Grump office, and at the very least we could say that they aren't the best at addressing controversy, and if that keeps you from being able to enjoy their commentary and how they play games, then more power to you. I would like to point out the fact, however, that in a lot of the rant videos against the GameGrumps, and particularly Arin, there's a clear political slant to them. Folks who want the GameGrumps to be edgy and make racial jokes like they used to, similar to Newground stuff back in the day. And so when you watch the videos, they portray the GameGrumps as these really unfunny and extremely bland people when it comes to their commentary. I go back again to how the American Pie thing was portrayed, as this really awkward and cringe moment where Arin was desperately trying to call out this movie for no reason, and Dan was such a soy boy trademark that he didn't say anything and didn't want to call out his boss. When in reality, it was a very casual conversation where Arin was clearly putting himself on a little bit of a pedestal, and Dan pretty candidly started calling him out for it in a comedic way that they were both laughing the whole time during. Now, do the GameGrumps do themselves any favors? Definitely not. Arin can be brash and tweet out things that are clearly meant to put himself above other creators, and there was a lot of shady stuff with Susie that I didn't go into because it wasn't super relevant, so I think at times if the Grumps had a little more sense with how they present themselves, these issues wouldn't come up as often. But, and I do want to stress this really does not affect their content. This is more like if you see a director you like saying dumb things on Twitter. This isn't something that just seeps into every aspect of their work. Both Dan and Arin clearly know that the show works best when they are both only focused on providing a chill atmosphere and making jokes. But of course, when you have people that are those particularly goofy gamers, you know, the all games are so woke and I want more huge-breasted naked anime girl subculture kind of gamer, they're gonna look into any sort of tiny and out-of-context issue that happens and make it into something that's extremely pervasive in the entire Game Grumps catalog, which, now as I'm saying it, seems pretty par for the course for those kinds of people. Overall, the Game Grumps have had a long and storied history, one that was clearly full of ups and downs and by far the most complex list of controversies I've seen of a YouTube channel. The thing that's most interesting about them, though, is that I've never seen a channel that is so resistant to attack, or more broadly, change in general. By that I mean, for any other channel I've covered, controversy in the surrounding YouTube space affects the quality of their content, and even the type of content they make to an extent. Good Mythical Morning started doing more food videos, CinemaSen started adding real criticisms into their satirical quips, even Mr. Ender stopped making as angry of reviews as he used to, but throughout everything that has happened, and I would say more so than has happened to any of these YouTube channels, the content of Game Grumps is still mostly the same as it's always been. Sure, folks have been switched out and co-hosts have had to grow into their own a little, but if you take an episode from 2013, improve the audio quality a little and take out the excessive swearing, I doubt you'd even be able to tell the difference between something that was released in 2025. To me, there's something that's really cool about that. Something that kind of keeps that old YouTube spirit alive. Even when you watch a video from someone like Markiplier, you can very easily tell that this was made after all the YouTube changes in the last decade have occurred. Not to say there's anything wrong with that, I actually like Markiplier's newer stuff astronomically more than I do his earlier videos, but to have a successful channel still putting out stuff very similar to the things you would see back in 2013, I don't know, it's kind of like finding out your old favorite restaurant is still serving the same stuff they would when you were a kid, or your favorite teacher is still teaching at the same school you used to go to. Hell, even the drama surrounding Game Grumps is very 2016-esque stuff. It's not like people are trying to call out Arin for texting some 14-year-old or something. The closest we got was Dan messaging someone in a non-sexual manner when they were 17 years and 11 months old, and that was shut down pretty quick. The drama surrounding Game Grumps is like the weird complicated stuff that boils down a lot of the time to petty stuff, like, why does Oni hate the Game Grumps? And Arin calls out this animation for being mean to these people, when in reality he was the one who was being stupid. I don't know, it just reminds me of when Grade A Underway was telling everyone to unsubscribe from Keemstar and sub to Scarce instead. Not like how it is today, where it's literally just always grooming allegations. Maybe that's what I'm trying to get at here with this whole video. As we've seen, the Grumps have always been the target of weird controversies ever since John left, and while a great deal of it was deserved, it just has taken us a given that Game Grumps fans and critics are particularly nutty people. When you look at their channel though, everything's normal. The comments are generally nice, and the content itself is basically the same as it's always been, just titled and packaged a little bit differently. While this video was meant as a retrospective and analysis primarily, if there's a takeaway here, it would probably be that a lot of the goings-ons both in and out of the internet space may seem like they're completely on fire at times. When you watch things that say society is crumbling and your neighbors and countrymen all secretly hate you, it's easy to just believe them and take everything at face value. But much like with the Game Grumps, the narratives you're being fed are generally just that. If you go out and continue on with your day, disregarding that preconceived notion in your head, you'll find that things are basically the same as they've always been. It's simply two guys sitting on a couch, playing the Grinch Christmas event. Wait, what? Anyway, thank you all so much for watching, love you all smooches, and I will see all of you in the next video. Goodbye.
Welcome to the first episode of Game Grumps. I guess this has to be the first one we put up now.
This is... Good job, fuckface.
Besides the intro video. So Game Grumps is a channel where we're gonna play video games and general grump around about it.
Grump around?
Alright, if you don't know me, I'm JonTron and he's Egoraptor.
Wait, I'm JonTron and he's Egoraptor?
Exactly.
You're good at this.
I'm JonTron and he's Egoraptor.
You're good at this.
Is this your first time playing this game?
No. Shall we explain copy?
No.
Who do you think I am?
Who do you think you are? Talking to me like this. Okay.
Alright, so do you remember how to do me?
Okay.
Make me appear?
Now the first thing, do me, goon me, gooey?
You gotta make me.
You gotta go left and up. This generally... That's how you play Krabby. Okay.
This isn't Krabby.
Oh, I think it's wait, no, I think
you gotta suck me
up,
and then you gotta hit. There you go.
I fucking know.
Fuck yeah.
But yeah, wait, is this not this isn't the one with Gooey? Gooey